Hey guys, and welcome to the latest art show with Simon and Tim. We've hopefully got a pretty cool show planned for you guys tonight. I'm going to talk about a whole bunch of different things and show some cool stuff and hopefully keep you guys entertained.
That's the plan.
Yeah, so tonight's show we're going to talk about inspiration and kind of just some of the things that can be a bit of a roadblock, I guess, with inspiration, and maybe some things that are positive as well, and just some things I guess you can do to kind of like, you know, help with some of these some of the topics around inspiration and what that means.
Yeah, it's a fairly abstract topic, but I think that we're just going to try and unpack it, I guess.
A little bit. It's a very broad topic as well.
Yeah.
We'll see how we go.
Yeah.
And yeah, we've got some work that we're going to show you guys as well. So we'll kind of go through some of that stuff first, and then we'll do some critiques and finish off with some demos. So yeah, really looking forward to the show. So let's kind of
should be good. Yeah.
Let's get into this and let's move back to Photoshop.
What have you been doing? Because it sounded like either you have been busy or and you have a bunch of stuff that you are sort of showing now that perhaps, you know, you kind of have like waited a while to sort of show in terms of some of the stuff you've been working on with other people here at CDW.
Yeah, we've got some stuff. So we're going to actually show a bit of IP development stuff that we've kind of been doing here. So just to give you guys a bit of an insight into kind of like, I guess, pipeline kind of concept through to 3D. So that could be pretty cool.
And by IP, you mean that you at CDW Studios, Simon and some other people have been working on
and
pitch for a and basically an animated show of some variety.
That's right. Yeah. So a fully 3D animated show, I guess, is the without you know.
We were talking a little bit about this last week with Pete, because I was saying like I don't like the term IP. As a thing, because it's sort of amorphous, and
well, you're like, what does that mean?
Yeah, it's sort of what it is. If you're in the business, you know what I mean. It's like, oh yeah, you're developing an IP, and if you're not, it's kind of like, what are you talking about? You know what I mean? So IP stands for intellectual property, and people often use IP when they say they're developing something when they often don't really know what they're developing. But they're kind of just starting, because often as a concept artist, you're actually really good at developing those ideas. Do you know what I mean? Before you have a story. So, you know, often people, you know, some people start out with an idea for a thing. Some people start out just with, I want to come up with ideas. And that's normally what people mean when they talk about IP.
Yeah. I think it's probably starting to have this colloquial term of being project sort of thing. Like it's kind of like, oh, we're working on this project, you know, IP.
Which I don't like. But
but
because it's unspecific and vague and is bastardizing the English language, which I think is not
so we're working on a 3D animated TV series.
Yep, that's right.
Okay, cool. And so I want to show you guys kind of the development of main character for that. And kind of the
which
steps
should be awesome.
Kind of go through.
I like the thing that will occur. Is often it's just
the
which is not to say you can still use IP. Anyone can still use it. I just need to register my like full disclosure. Poor usage of language, because it's like an acronym. Soon people will start saying I'm working on my Ep, you know, and then it'll be like, because then you'll be really cool and
with the cool kids.
That'll be the end of the world, and I'll just
So and also like really like each week, just really encouraging chat and any questions you've got about this stuff. You know, is excellent and just helps us kind of move the show forward and talk about things that you guys are interested in. I mean, we can talk for hours and hours. Tim and I,
and we do
about stuff. So, like, you know, but if you guys kind of have something that you're interested in, then you know, kind of shout out. So
because that is good. I mean, we do genuinely enjoy the show a lot more when people are sort of interacting and. We can sort of get a feel for like what people are interested in hearing. I feel like the shows, you know, typically that's the good thing about Twitch anyway. And live streaming. So we do really like it when people ask questions in the chat and sort of come up with things. No question is too silly or naive or whatever. We'll try and answer sort of everything or try and address it. And really good when people send in work for critique and stuff like that as well. So what's this?
Well, these were just some paintings that I did this week, which were some class demos.
For which class?
For digital painting. So
Yep.
kind of intro to digital painting, which is probably not that intro at this point in time.
Yep.
But yeah, so this is kind of like leading up for students' major project and trying to just take some paintings through to kind of finish and trying to, add all the little, frills to
Yep.
things. Yeah. So, but what I thought, I'd kind of show you guys is got a bit of a process here. So I just kind of saved out, a bunch of things. And I guess this is probably like one of the more important ones because,
Did you do these thumbnails?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. What?
Since when do you do thumbnails?
All the time?
All the time.
I actually think like, it's, I do this all the time, before classes or during the week or whatever, just on post-it notes, just trying to come up with ideas. But a lot of times, what I'm doing is getting references that I think are cool, and then kind of just quickly scribbling down kind of a bit of an idea with a composition, right? So,
right.
And they're super rough. They're really only legible by me. I mean, I guess you can get kind of a vague vibe of what they are.
I think when you combine them with the reference, I feel like they make a lot more sense because I can sort of see.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh yeah, no, I get sort of what you're talking about. So, and you're basically taking like the idea from the photo, but sort of making it a composition that fits within the frame and
that's right,
and that sort of thing.
Yeah, just trying to like use reference and sort of visualize what you want to have.
Yeah,
and try and because you don't want to just make this place because this place already exists. So if we wanted to make that as part of a game order, we could just go there and take photos and give it to the 3D guys, and they can just build it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's sort of like taking kind of interesting cues from the photos and then developing that into a composition. Now I think when you're starting out, like probably that translation is one of the hardest things to do, like because that's kind of like your shot design, like what the initial thing is that you want to actually do.
Yeah.
And I think that like when you see more experienced artists, their initial little lay-in is just so much better than someone that's like only done 10 paintings before or something, right?
Yeah.
Because they're already thinking like 35 steps ahead of like what's working, how can compositions kind of go, things like that, right? So, these scribbles will be really fast and probably for some people they'd be like, oh, I can't really do anything from these, right?
Yeah.
But, for me it's just good. You can just kind of just get through ideas. And once again, I think for people starting out, this is one thing they probably don't do enough of is just exploring different ideas rather than just going like straight into it. Because the first 3 or 4 are kind of always a bit boring. Yeah. And then there's just, and then it might end up the first one is the best one, but you kind of like tweak it a bit along the way and you think about like what the story might be or what, extra elements.
Yeah, totally.
By doing all sorts of different things, So, sorry, so that was that one. And then basically we just go through. And now this one is a bit of a fool's gold in terms of there was a line drawing over this. So I just blew the thumbnail up. I had the line drawing and all I wanted to do was just start blocking in color, right? Yeah. And then I just started getting some photos. Now, because this is sort of like really building up to the major project, I'm like, all right, let's just not worry about painting things. This is going to start like jamming things in because everyone's seen the process like 30 times already of how you can just paint it and then start, So it was kind of like, let's do this quick. Like I would do if I was doing a job. I'd just like start, kind of putting things in.
Yep.
And then here, sorry, just getting the right keys. And then just sort of working on a bit of a background.
Yep.
Getting that to read. And then what I was doing here is just starting to work on the kind of mid-ground. And it looks really dirty, like really rough because I've got like different layers and I'm starting to think like what's in the mid-ground area. And then I'm going to overlay stuff in the foreground. And then I've got a background. So I guess I kind of know some of the steps that are going to happen. So it can look a bit rough like this, but I'm okay with that.
You have an idea of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And regardless of whether or not you end up doing that, that's still a major part of it.
Yeah,
it's like,
I think so.
You're always trying to head in some direction,
Yeah.
And I think we've often seen that is no matter how good an artist is, if you take their painting halfway finished and then you try and finish it, it's like, I don't know. I don't know how to make that masterpiece from this painting that's half finished. Like you can see their half finished painting is better than like my half finished painting.
Yeah.
But I still doesn't help me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
For
because
sure.
painting process is a huge part of it is this kind of weird thing where you're just sort of holding it in your head. You know, like there's no, unless you have like and especially when you're doing this, unless you're sort of doing like a really old school process where you do like a detailed thumbnail, detailed grayscale, detailed color rough, detailed construction drawing. You transfer that to board. You block in the colors. You render it all. You know what I mean, based on the color rough. Like unless you're doing that to the point where you know you're using this, you're mixing the same paint that you used for the color rough in the fight. Like, yeah, it's always still in your head.
That's right.
You know, like there's still that thing where it's like you have an idea and that's being modified by what's on the page.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things here where even so, some of that stuff is like at this point in time, I didn't know I was going to go in this direction. Right? But then I was kind of like, oh, I wanted some tree stuff going on. So I actually think in class I had to Google something because I didn't have ref for that. I'm like, let's just Google some gnarly tree roots or whatever and found something. And I started just cut some out and just put them in. And I was like, oh, cool, that's kind of interesting. Like, let's go with that. And that's also very difficult as well. And then you get it to this point and it's like it looks pretty rough. But you can see that it's kind of an interesting thing going on.
Looks
so you're
good
like,
to me.
you know? And then the next step is sort of let's
add depth.
Yeah, so basically like it's just foreground stuff there. And that was literally just the photo from the original reference that you guys just saw. Oops, wrong way. And then this is probably the trickiest part, right? Which is like, you know, you comping in the photos and stuff, but then actually painting the stuff in, you know, and because it relies on your actual like painting skills, right? And just thinking of the forms and the three-dimensionality of things and actually trying to get the stuff that you're hacking in there to read as a thing, which just always goes back to basically drawing the cube, right? It's just those things, 1, 2, 3, read, you know, get, you know, just all that stuff. So that's just kind of the painting, the painting part, which, you know, is always like kind of the funnest part. And then, so then we've got kind of just starting to work on the foreground tree. And that was kind of interesting. I think that really helped this painting a lot because I started using some of those roots as well. Like there's two photos here on the right hand side. There's one is a normal tree trunk and the other one is some of these roots kind of like just overlaid on top. And I feel like that started bringing the visual language of the painting together. Like it kind of started tying the foreground to the background and sort of makes the world feel a little bit more believable. And then it's sort of just working on, you know, the lighting and the other side and, you know, kind of just working on that composition a bit and stuff. And then so here is just putting in the character. I did a few little you know, color adjustment things, which blue misty kind of always makes things a bit fantasy. You know, it's like so
cool.
So and then once again, you know, it's the painting, right? Just getting things to work, painting stuff, all those things, getting everything to read. And then I think this might be the this was once again just painting, you know, and getting the details and things. So lots of those kind of little spiky bits and stuff. But that's really, once again, just helps with that visual language, kind of pulling it, you know, like unifies all the bits together and kind of just makes the place feel, you know, more believable.
Well, it makes it feel like it's kind of you're entering, which it makes it more video gamey, I guess, where it feels like you're entering a world where everything's a bit like that. Because I mean, I feel like you could have done, if you sort of left it like it was before, it would have made like this thing feel much more unique within the world. You know what I mean? Because it's like just a forest with this thing in it. Whereas now it feels like there's a forest that's all a bit like that. It's all a bit twisted. So a lot of that depends what you want to do.
That's right.
I mean?
That's right. Yeah. So you can always play around, and I kind of like just kind of tilted the camera a bit, and just kind of
made it more creepy and weird.
Yeah,
and put some birds in.
Yes, put some birds in, of course.
Yeah,
definitely, because it's like The Witcher. So the project is The Witcher, is doing some, like, imagining you're doing some concepts for Witcher 4.
Yep.
And this was the entry to the Dark Forest.
Yep.
So, and The Witcher always has some birds kind of flying around and stuff, so we just needed to add that. And then the other thing was, I actually did, this was like another demo from the same kind of project.
Yep.
So this was just another take on the Dark Forest Witcher. Yeah. It's really interesting because, like, Tim and I were actually kind of talking about some of this stuff earlier, where like this was kind of like about an hour and 20 minutes in class sort of demo. Getting this, and there were some bits I really like about it in terms of the tree and things. I thought that looked really cool, just the way it kind of sits in and sort of some of the creepiness to it. And then I really think this has a lot of potential, but there's things like I kind of put some stairs down here, and like I'm like, duh, why didn't I just put them like kind of going to this head kind of piece and stuff? And some of the things I wanted to do was like add in some like wooden struts and things like that to kind of make it feel like there might be a bit of like kind of civilization kind of stuff around. And I mean, I just kind of didn't get to it, but I was going to like add in this like statues kind of arm and stuff, like just make it a bit more kind of like coming forward and things. But well, it's like more time.
I mean, because I think it's like, I mean, one of the interesting things about this is like, I feel like when you look at your painting, like to a certain degree, what we were saying before is true, that you can't really take someone else's painting and sort of be like, oh, I could finish this. But I feel like there's always a point at which I see like one of your pro show shots and I'm like, I would have gone in a completely different direction. You know what I mean? So it's like I find that stuff sort of interesting, where it's kind of like, I'm like, oh yeah, but I think that's just because you are sort of thinking, you're like, this is my image that I have in my head, this is kind of what I want to do. And I think to a certain degree it's like that biases the decisions you make, as you're sort of going through the process. So whereas I'm like, well, it's kind of creepy that there's stairs going nowhere, because you kind of think, what's up with that
and stuff, and
well, no, just maybe like there's people who build stairs that don't go anywhere, and like, who would do that? That's kind of creepy, So a lot of that is, if you're doing video games, you're trying to rationalize pathways and that sort of stuff, whereas I'm kind of like, you just have a stairway going to nothing, and it's like, well, what's that about? That's kind of creepy. So like the unknown, where you kind of as long as like there's enough stuff, because it's all rendered nicely, I think. Anyway, like a lot of it is kind of, what are you trying to do? Like so many of these decisions about like, do you want the forest to feel like you're just in a sea of weird sort of trees, or do you want it to be like, this is the weird tree amidst a very normal forest, right? Like you would modify the visual language that way,
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things in the brief was that the brief was kind of like, it's the entrance to the Dark Forest.
Right.
So I think that was one of my things in my decisions, where I was trying to get it to feel like these are kind of like linking you to something else further on, if that makes sense. Yeah, and trying to like kind of tie that in together, where it's kind of felt like a pathway of like, we want the player to kind of work, climb up whatever these wooden struts that I'm going to paint in here, and they kind of like lead, around to here, and you're going to go across to here, and I guess like I'm always thinking of that kind of like gameplay kind of stuff, because I've done so much of that it's like always hear the art director in my head, like
where are we going? What are we doing?
That's right.
And that is a big thing. You frequently hear people who work in games doing that a lot. Like you've got to go somewhere. And,
well, because in the game you do, right?
Yeah, like, you do. Like that's and again, like that's a primary thing you do, is actually not just sort of concept out broader ideas, but actually specifically continually finesse ideas to kind of direct people through it. Because I don't know whether you know this, guys, but if you play bad games where this isn't in there, it's really frustrating. You don't know where to go. I feel like so much of that advice, that it feels really hokey and kind of like, really, do we have to be that simple? But you just have to play things where that's not there, or you have to watch movies where, for instance, like one of those cinematographic rules is always, the 180 rule, where like you don't want to kind of violate like an imaginary 180 degree sort of like arc around a character, because then you could kind of essentially have the same angle, and then the other person, opposite them is actually just the same, and it's just like the person would just change.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because you're viewing it from the same angle, and so you want to kind of like not move the camera around the people. And anyway, I mean, most people know what that rule is, and it's like, you know, it's like, really, you know, that sounds really dumb, and everyone's like, do this or don't do that. You know, all you have to do is see a film where they haven't done that, and you're just like,
what is going on?
What is going on? You know, and it's not fun. You know, it's not like an art house film. It's just kind of like, who are these people? Because you'll just be looking at someone's face, and then their face will just be like plump, plump, change. It doesn't. They don't swap sides. You know. So yeah, you just have to play games where you're just wandering around in a circle, bumping into stuff and not sure where to go.
Oh, and I mean, like some of the games now, like those Uncharted games and Last of Us, and they're just finessing that until the cows come home, right? Until the nth degree. Just
and
like,
that's so like to a certain degree, I think, because people like, you know, people don't want to feel as if they're incompetent playing games. They want to feel as if
I'm so awesome at just getting
through this like I understand where to go, you know. Whereas if you're actually treasure hunting, it would probably be a lot of you
not knowing where you
camping out in the middle of nowhere for like 5 months. You know, it'd be pretty boring, you know. Whereas, so, you know, there's good reasons for all that stuff.
Right, and so let's maybe so they're just some things that I've been doing. We'll show some of the character stuff in a minute, but let's maybe show some of your stuff.
Yeah. What have I been doing? So these are some demos that I was doing for my character design 2 class, where essentially the idea was just to get people to draw or design a space mercenary, right? So it's like it's a very simple take on my sort of character design class. And what I was trying to do is get people to like immerse themselves in the visual design language of science fiction, and especially popular science fiction. So that especially people who haven't drawn a lot of science fiction before can actually complete a brief that might be a little bit outside their comfort zone. Because one of the things with, you know, running one of these classes is that if you're unspecific with a brief, right, I feel like that allows people to have more freedom, and so they can actually do stuff they like. But the problem is then it doesn't feel like a real brief.
Yeah, for sure.
Right, it's like, this is not really, you know, because normally you have more restriction. But when you put more restriction on, some people are going to feel way comfortable drawing elves, and some people are going to be like, this is my worst nightmare. I just hate every single thing about this, you know. And I just, like, you've had people who are like, oh, we're just doing fantasy, I don't want to take this class, you know? I quit, you know. So I tried to do a class where I basically spent a lot of the time walking people through the process of like building visual library for this stuff, and then just kind of, so you build a bunch of visual library, and then you just kind of spit out ideas for just different space mercenaries. So these are just different ideas for different space mercenaries, and they're sort of done with, you know, a fairly sort of strict time limit, where I'm just kind of like, draw a thing, you know, like whatever happens, right? There's not a lot of thought or editing going into it. So that's what these were like.
No, it's cool. And you kind of went through the whole process during the class, right? Of kind of like, you know, thumbnailing and sketches.
I didn't.
Oh, you didn't with these ones?
No. This is I did this as a demo outside of class.
Oh, right.
Because I find like often doing because probably like to do all of these and to do it with the speed that I was doing it, you really need to be 100% focused.
Sure.
Right? Like if I was sort of doing this as a demo, you know, it probably would take me, you know, quite a while, you know, like 12 hours or something to do this. Whereas normally the way I work, I wanted to show people the way I work with these, which is I don't do a lot of underdrawing, and a lot of it is very much me focused, making stuff up and kind of trying to make things very like sort of seat of the pants. Because I've done a fair bit of this stuff. So that's kind of what I was trying to do with these. Is this is actually like a separate tutorial that's not part of sort of in demo. But we did some we did some in class stuff. But yeah, these ones are. This is what I would actually do. No,
that's cool. It's awesome. They look great. Yeah, and then you had some other stuff here.
No, that's all.
Oh no, that was okay.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah, that's all. So that's just something I did.
As
like a class demo, but
awesome. No, it's great. Cool. All right. Well, let's go through this then. We've got
So what's happening here? Because again, I've seen some of this stuff, but not a lot. Because again, people probably don't know a lot of what goes on behind the partitions at CDW. but I don't actually work at CDW. Do you know what I mean? There's teachers and people who work like at CDW full time. I don't do that. I just teach a couple of classes.
That's right.
We've known each other for years, and I'm often in here and talking and all sort of stuff. But I don't actually do any of that, so I haven't actually seen a lot of this stuff. This is sort of cool for me to finally see some of it.
Yeah, and what we're going to talk about here is maybe is some decisions, I guess, that were kind of like made that like make something go in one direction or another direction, right? And so these were literally the initial character designs. So the main character we've got is Moonsinger here. And, so basically she's kind of like a elf assassin, stealthy, red ninja kind of. That's the brief, right? And
at this stage you probably didn't have a story locked down.
We had a treatment. So basically what happened with these is Rebecca got to read a story, got to read like 6 pages of a story, and it was like that there's the character.
That's what they're going to do.
Come up
That's
with,
what they need to be.
Yeah, come up with that character that's in that story. So I think that's probably why these characters kind of like are pretty on point really quick, because there was a really good text to go with that that had a lot of descriptions about what she was wearing and the colors and all that kind of stuff. So so that was really cool, right? And I think also the text described a lot of the movements and things too. So I think that kind of like we wanted it quite like different proportions and things like that as well. So
these are done by Rebecca Oborn, who is a former student at CDW who was doing some work with you guys.
Former student at CDW. Then she was working on this project like 2 days a week, just kind of part-time, and now she's recently got a job in Brisbane, full-time job, and moved to Brisbane to a game studio and doing work there now. So so it's pretty awesome story. So and then we've got essentially like we'll show these are very early on, and like kind of like Rebecca's like, please don't show this.
Right.
But like these are like some faces, and it was like, oh, okay, all right, well, next, move on. But sometimes you kind of like sometimes you just got to get ideas out, right? And just come up with stuff. And then
so these are all Rebecca's basically.
So these are all Rebecca's here.
Because I don't think anyone else is doing character design on this project.
No, not really. Not at this point in time, anyway. So Rebecca was just designing this character.
So this is taking like more detail, basically.
Yeah. So I actually think that maybe there was some more thumbnails in between.
I'm sure there was a lot more stuff than this.
Between the first one, the initial ones, and this, but we were just quickly trying to find some stuff before the stream. So, but this is really getting into like more refined, coming up with like costumes, kind of faces, different options for hoods, all that kind of stuff. And at this point in time, we're kind of locked in on the character, the kind of feel of the character, and now it's more just kind of like finessing stuff. And
it seemed like you kind of went with one that has more straps, right? Like if you compare it to the earlier ones, some of those were a bit more sort of, seemed like there was a bit more sort of cloth, right? Like on some of them, like but you kind of zeroed in probably on like having a bit more of that sort of like lots of leather straps. And
I think it was a bit to do with like kind of just the breakup of the colors and stuff. Kind of the patterning, so it would kind of read well, from a distance and kind of in movement and things. Just getting that nice contrast between like the dark armor and the kind of red, costume. We thought that was pretty cool. And I don't know if you'll notice some secret little things here, and hope we won't, kind of give too much of the story away, but Moonsinger has some very unusual ears and some horns and stuff as well. So, so there's a bunch of different things that we're kind of working on and kind of pushing through here. These are just some more developments, just things getting more refined and things like that. I actually think maybe the other stuff options was before. And this is the villain
right.
the show.
Comparing the silhouettes.
Yeah, but we're not showing her just yet.
Mm-hmm.
That can be for another week.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think this was kind of like the final concept of the character that everyone was kind of happy with and locked in on. So yeah, just working on some of the armor patterning and and things like that. So yeah.
Yep.
But it's certainly like pretty cool. Yeah, a bit of a different character and pretty striking and things. So
yeah,
it's good. So here we're starting to actually, I'm not 100% like some of this order is not like necessarily chronological, right? So, but let's just have a look at some of this stuff. So yeah, starting to get into 3D, and blocking those things out, and that was kind of a bit of a process too, which was just moving into the 3D and kind of getting things to where us as a concept artist kind of wanted it to be. So had to give lots of direction and things to the 3D modelers, and it's a really important thing to think about, like when you're actually being a concept artist and kind of like designing things out, is that you are designing things so that someone is going to build that thing, and part of your job is to be really clear. If you're not clear, the person who's on the other end of that can't really do their job very well.
Most of your job is to be really clear. I would say, and especially because like I feel like often concept artists, and especially when I feel like we didn't have the tools that we have today, when people were using like markers and stuff, your primary goal is to kind of show form in your design so that someone can actually see what you're drawing, so that they can model it and actually assess it. Whereas if you're a painter, often what you're trying to do is kind of, often focus detail somewhere, whereas, you kind of have to render out the whole thing, like the feet, let's, render all the little bumps and stuff like that. And so often the art itself can look a bit ugly. Do you know what I mean? And I think you can see that with some of like the full model sheets, is they look a bit busy if you view them like, versus, like an illustration or something like that. And that's just because a modeler is looking at the boot and going, how do I draw that thing? How do I make
the boot?
You know what I mean? Whereas as an illustrator, you'd be like, who cares about feet? That's not important.
Let's get some lost edges in there.
Yeah, exactly. Let's just black that out, because it's not as important. Whereas when you're designing stuff, you're trying to make sure people know what that is, because some poor guy or girl has got to go in there and model those boots. And that's really where those, like, when we're talking about the art fundamentals and drawing the cube and rendering the cube and doing all those boring things, right, is like that's what it's leaning to, is it's teaching you to kind of like focus in and pay attention to those details, so that when you're tasked with drawings to actually be built into something, you know how to do that stuff, right? And so this is probably something you've done a bit of too, is like drawing over 3D models. Kind of like you'll get a model back and you kind of be like, that's not exactly what I meant. So you have to kind of like go, let's squish this bit in and make this bit bigger, and all those kinds of things. So this is a really good example of that kind of stuff here. There's things like, so really important stuff for you guys that are watching is, stuff like, the modeler was really like, can I even find some of those stuff? Is like, what is this here? Like, what actually is it? Is it material? Is it a sash? Is it exactly.
It's a red thing.
How
I'm assuming it's material.
What's it made
of? So that's where you kind of like start going through and have to start getting some of these references and going, this is kind of like that, and really starting to get into those nitty gritty details of what stuff actually is. So yeah, I guess that's like a pretty cool example of like what real production art sort of is like working in a team, collaborating, and with the end goal in mind, as kind of a group on a project. So let's have a look. So we kind of like, we had some models at the start where it was like, even kind of getting the faces, we were kind of like thinking about how animalistic the character could be, like how kind of human versus like animal. And like when we were originally getting into ZBrush, the modeling side of it was quite difficult, like how where to push those things. So we're starting to kind of just look at how taking the models and kind of painting over and things. And that was very much like a kind of process to go through. and kind of work out. We're even getting into some of like the weapon design, because she's got some daggers and things, and just trying to get that to match in with her costume. And once again, paying attention to that stuff, looking at front views, sort of describing all these things so that they can be modeled, once again. So it's always about that. So yeah, for you guys. And then this was probably the main image that we did, which was, this was a paint over from a ZBrush model. And Ned, who you've probably seen on the stream before, is he kind of painted over this, and this was the first one where we're kind of like, like that's the character, that's her right there. Let's just try and focus all our energies to get it to look like that. So that was a real kind of like nice little watershed moment where we made some decisions about how it's going to kind of go. So we wanted it to kind of like look a little bit stylized, but also feel kind of realistic, and just push some of those things around.
You're not really just designing the character to a certain degree. You're sort of also trying to design how Rebecca's art would translate into 3D, which is actually a significant challenge to do anything like that, because her style is kind of more sort of cartoony, and like a lot of the appeal of that stuff is that there is a two-dimensionality to it, and fundamentally it is very tricky to translate that stuff to 3D.
So that's right. So once again, like, how does a 3D modeler make this face? Because like, for all you guys that 2D out there, it looks really cool, right? But a 3D modeler gets it and just goes like, what the actual, do I do?
And not just that, but I think like and really good 3D modelers can just take that and sort of make something out of it. But they may make something good, but it may not be what you want, right? Like, people can sort of take it and you look at it and be like, wow, that's really cool, but is that what you want to build a whole world out of, right?
That's right.
Like, can you do that? Is it sensible? So that's why it's like collaboration is often what you need to do.
Yeah, so it takes a bit of like back and forthing and kind of just going through this process, and it takes a while. And here is some like kind of early on. Here is some so we've got some questions. So the question is, whose IP is this? And this is just something we're working on at CDW behind the scenes. So a 3D animated TV series is what we're aiming for here.
Pitch for 3D.
Just pitching that. So this is where the character's starting to get to a reasonable result here. There's things that are working and coming along. There's stuff that's not working still, and once again, we get into 3D, and it's a big process, and it's a real team effort. I would say there's like 6 people working on this character in like different kind of ways and stuff. So it's pretty cool. What do we got here? This was a painting that we've used on the kind of Twitch page and stuff, but once again, this was something that was like a really cool turning point in terms of like decisions that were getting made on a character.
So now it's not just that, but you're thinking about how it could all fit into a color palette that could look fantasy, and I think one of the other things is like, it actually takes a lot of skill to look at a ZBrush model that's like halfway finished, and have any idea of how that's going to look like once you've got shaders and rendering on it and stuff like that. I mean, if you haven't done that before, it's very tricky. Whereas if someone's quite experienced, and you have a team, you can kind of maybe look at that ZBrush model like way earlier on and say like, oh nah, do this or that. Whereas like a large part of probably what you're doing is just actually kind of trying to figure out whether stuff you did 3 steps ago will actually work.
That's right.
Because the real problem with 3D is you kind of need to get a whole bunch of stuff in there before it even looks like anything.
That's right. And it's like, one of the things we're really finding out is like 80% of the time it just looks shit. Right until the end, and then all of a sudden it looks, all the technical guys go boom and do all this crazy stuff, and then it's like boom, and it sort of comes out the microwave, and it's like, ready to go. So one of the things that was cool about this is literally a paint job over that face that I showed you before, that had that startled, no eyelashes, no eyebrows thing. And this has just been moved around in Photoshop a bit. That's all.
Yep.
And kind of the eyelids have been added and eyelashes and kind of stuff like that.
Which to do in 3D is quite
that's
tricky.
Right. Yeah, because you kind of need a rig.
That's a couple of days of work to put in eyebrows, you know.
Yeah, more than a couple of days. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas you can just paint them in, you know.
That's right.
And people, because people often ask, like, I feel like people feel like ZBrush is so easy to use. 3D is so easy to use. Like, why do you need concept artists anymore? And the reality is, it's like, yeah, well, even to figure out how to put the eyes on, you know, you kind of need a concept artist for that, because, you know, like the model, one of the modelers who's working on this, you know, like sort of Alex, he can't paint that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if you did, it's like it would take him longer than it would to take a concept artist. So it's just simple math of like, you know, money versus time. You still need the concept artist. You know what I mean? It's probably more relevant now than it ever was, but I feel like people are concerned in general, like, you know, people can do all this cool stuff, and, you know, do we still need concept artists?
That's a good point.
You know, you need more concept artists and more stuff. Because
that's right. Well, a great example of that is this, where, you know, it's literally took Ned like one afternoon to paint this. And if I wanted to get the same result from the 3D guys, it probably would have been like 2 months. 2 months of stuff to get it to like this point, right? If we wanted this image.
And you may have to throw all that out.
And it might not look good, right? So this was one of those moments where we're kind of like, it kind of like makes the team go, whew, everything's going to be okay, right?
You have a common vision.
That's right.
And that's the other thing, not to keep interrupting your narrative, but I feel like common vision in a production is so critical, right? If you don't have that common vision where like you put up, again, the main character of the main thing on the wall, and it's like, this is what we're doing. You can have people who are all kind of good, but they don't have confidence in the project. And they're kind of like, you know, you'll be saying to a 3D modeler, hey, can you do the hair? And they're kind of like, yeah, but I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing. And two people will be saying different things. Once you have a picture, you can be like,
that's right.
Make it like that.
Everybody make it like this,
Look
please.
it like that, yeah. And then it'll be okay. You know what I mean? That shared vision is so important, not necessarily for productivity, but for morale, I think, to get everyone on the same page, you know. And that's one of those things that's like, you know, for a long time in human history, leadership has been important, you know. And if you don't have someone saying, let's all go this way, guys, let's go here and do this thing, and people are going to be like, oh, but what about this and what about that? And you kind of have to say like, no, not only do I know that this is the right decision, but I can prove it to you, you know. And the visual stuff is so that's the only way you can do it. You can't have a conversation about this. Totally pointless. You can't be like, we all agree it should look like this.
Yeah, that's right. And it's like one of the things is, you know, it's where you know, not even that, because that's probably a good example of having that thing. But let's go back to, you know, like here, right? And it's like, I guess it's going to be okay. I don't know. It still kind of looks like some low res game model to me, but you know, the 3D guys like, yeah, it's going to be fine. But you know, you go back to, you know, this kind of thing here, and you're like, okay, you know, this is what I want to play. This is what I want to watch. You know, right? So that's where, you know, kind of the concept stuff comes in, and you can see here one of the things that was really cool is this model at that time had no hair. So the hair was kind of painted on, and you'll see later on how it actually ends up kind of looking like that hair, which is really cool, because the guys are like, oh yeah, it needs to look like that. So they just then build it to
kept fiddling with it until it looks
like
that. It's actually so like it's always easier to replicate something, right? Like, you know, it's like the first person runs the 4-minute mile, and then everyone's like, oh, I can do that too. That's right. You know, it's the same with art. So there was a question, or just like a comment about like, is that why sort of treatments and briefs are important, so everyone's on the same page? I'd say like, yeah, you know, like, cause it's you're trying to get what's the minimum viable product to move forward, so you can get people on the same page. You know what I mean? And it's like before you spend time, because relative to just writing some stuff down, doing a whole pile of concept art, even though concept art is much more efficient than 3D models, concept art is still very time consuming. So sure, like the brief is the first step, but I always say if you're dealing with any sort of visual thing, you really need to make sure that you don't stay too long on the words, and you get that hero image that's like, this is what it's going to look like. And
And then one of the cool things about this project is that the visuals have then in turn influenced the words, right? And those things can kind of work in unison. And I think there's a lot of projects where that can't happen or doesn't happen. And yeah, with this project, it's been really quite amorphous in kind of how it's evolved and things. So yeah, it's like, I think that's really cool. Yeah, because a lot of projects you get like something and it's like, it's got to be this and we can't really change stuff, and you're like, oh, we're going to make these crappy decisions because of this. Whereas something where we're kind of working on this project internally, we can kind of change things because we're like, oh, it would look better if she had green ears, you know. And then it's like, okay, everything in the thing is now green ears, you know. So that's kind of cool. Probably can be also might not always be the best way to do things either, but you know, it's cool. So
well, I'd say there's probably more back and forwards than people generally realize in most production. You know, like it's never that pretty. No, it's always like a tug of war of, you know, different ideas and directions of things to go. Like, once again, you know, I said at the start that there's some really key things that happen to push the direction, right? But that could have gone like a number of different ways. So you could have done it way more cartoony than this, for instance. You know what I mean? You could have had none of this realistic rendering on here, and that would have, like, based on the first concept art that was done, that would have been totally fine. You know, you could easily have interpreted it that way.
Yeah. And this is just getting into some more 3D.
But this is still painted over?
This is painted over, So, but this is like kind of a render out of, you know, like Mari or something, where there's some textures applied and stuff, and there's a bit of paint work. There's actually, I'm not sure of the timeline of this one in particular, but we've got a 3D background in there that is like the 3D background and stuff, and so there's a lot of kind of cool stuff going on in this one, and just developing things. We're now starting to get like some poses done. So these are kind of frames out of a storyboard, and there's some questions about the target demographic. So this is kind of aimed at, you know, like a late teen to kind of, you know, adult type of thing. So yeah, there's some violence, there's some slicing and dicing of you know, unsuspecting characters.
Same as, like, you know, a fantasy sort of anime sort of thing, like not, because I guess
not for kids, not for kids is
not
mostly,
not for young kids.
That's right. So so this is kind of taking some frames from like storyboards, just fleshing them out a bit more so that we can hand them over to our animator. So that's also like a really important part of the process, is that especially when you get characters of kind of different proportions and things like that, really getting some of those, you know, key poses together so that like that animators can also be informed of like how they need to kind of do things and stuff. So that's also like another really, you know, good job for the concept artists. And like we've got so much stuff that we could show guys. Like there's literally like 1,000 images of things, and we can go through all different processes of stuff, but this is just kind of the character,
just the main character. Cool.
Just the main character. Even we've got
so just more stuff.
There's villains, and, you know,
which is basically you're just trying to communicate that she's like a bit sort of stealthy and sneaky, which you would imagine you could just say, but then I think you would be surprised how often people have these conversations about just make it like this, and then you get something back. So
that's right.
A picture is always more reliable.
And so once again, this is starting to get into the more finished product. And this is another one of those moments where it's like, when we saw this, it's like, cool. Like, this is what I want to kind of see. This is still a bit like kind of low res. So like the textures and things, and we'll get into this in a second, is like still kind of low res textures, but you can really start to get a sense of feeling of like, this character is going to kind of work and look like the stuff that we kind of want it to look like. So so I guess for you guys, you know, sort of like a League of Legends cinematic kind of quality to things. So and then I think, what else have we got here? Some bits here where, like, you know, kind of the technical guys are getting into things. less concept art here, but you know, they're trying to get the hair to match some of those concepts that we had earlier. And as you can see on here, is like things are all a bit broken, but and we're starting to work on some of the skin you know, and trying to push some of this stuff around, work on exactly how stylized things are and how the light affects things, and all sorts of kind of technical stuff. Starting to work on the fabric and the textures and all the things. So there's a lot of work. There's a lot of work that goes into kind of really getting, you know, the character kind of fleshed out. And then here, these are just some really nice examples of moving into like kind of 4K textures and stuff. These are obviously some low res screenshots, but I guess you can start to see that you can really, you know,
if you do close-ups on that, there's going to be something there.
That's right. That's right. So and once again, like she always looks weird with like kind of just
standard lighting,
like just the deer in the headlights face.
Totally.
So it's you always got to kind of go back and remember that pose that Ned painted. It's like that's, you know,
that's what we're going to look at. That's what it's going to look like.
But just really getting into these textures and things. And you can see really getting into some of those details, which is really cool because let's remember that's S, right? Which is really cool because this is sort of, you know, going back to here. You know, where these details were kind of in the concept, right? And we're sort of really referencing back at a later stage. At a later stage to that, you know, to that concept art and how to get that feeling into, you know, the final model and things. So it's really cool. It's awesome. Like, and I know like Rebecca just would see this stuff and be like, oh, this is so cool, because it sort of starts coming to life. And I don't know, like I know when I've been on, you know, projects, other projects, is like for me, when you see the concepts that you do kind of like come to life in 3D, that's like the most amazing moment. You just like all the hard work is just forgotten about, and you're like, oh, yes, this is so cool, you know. So
totally.
I think for you guys that are starting out, like, you know, that's a moment to look forward to, right? It's like when that kind of stuff happens. So I think kind of finishing up here. So you can, you know, just see that everything's just getting kind of more detailed and things like that as it goes along. Cool. And really looking cool. So I just kind of wanted to give you guys an insight into like the process and how, you know, how much work can be involved, but also how important those initial steps are. You know, that like
you can see where they go. You know what I mean? Like what the whole point of it is. But I think like the main thing is just realizing how important concept art is to the process. You know what I mean? And it's like, at the same time, you know, like Rebecca didn't do any of that final 3D, but at the same time, she kind of did all of it. You know what I mean? And that's that collaborative thing where it's sort of, it's like sort of super important, but at the same time, it's like, you know, you're kind of just helping everyone out. But it is like really, really important. And
that's also one of the things I think that people starting out, students, is like you really got to get a handle on being collaborative, because there's a really, like, unless you're literally working on like a project like you did with your comic book, whereas like you're writing it, you're drawing it, you're finishing it,
every single thing,
every other kind of like, well, all the jobs in kind of entertainment, you know, is like they're collaborative, right? Like you're working with a team and you're trying to get something finished at the end, so you're kind of doing whatever you can to help this all the parts add up to like this thing here. And I think sometimes when you're starting out, you kind of get a bit like, oh, this is just mine, and I can't, you know, I don't want to like change the thing that somebody just said, oh, you should make that, you know, a heart shape instead of a, you know, whatever it is. But you just need to get comfortable with like kind of working with people, with you know, taking on board feedback, you know, changing things, because most of the time it's, I know like Brian Winey, when he was here recently, he was talking about plussing, right? And it's that whole thing of like, you know, give it to somebody else and they're going to like add things to it, and don't be like, oh man, you know, like this sucks. Why not? You know, just kind of be like, whoa, that's cool.
I think a fundamental key thing there is that's why you need those key shots, right? Those like, you know, that thing, right, where Ned did the paint over. Because that's what allows two people to do that, to say, I'm going to plus it because I can see some stuff that is going to head us towards that goal that maybe you can't see. And someone else might be like, yeah, you know what, I'm sort of blind. I'm sick of this. You know what I mean? Like, I don't really know what to do anyway. But if you have that shared goal, it's not a matter of you kind of playing that tug of war so much. And I think that's why, like, good art direction, good, like, you know,
Yep.
companies and good structure, and that's why people spend so much time doing that. And if you look at the structure of a lot of these, you know, games where the budget is like $500 million or something like that,
or whatever
you
it is.
see, like, these people are not messing around. I mean, they're very serious about having, you know, having all of that production work well and work together, because you can waste many millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Many.
Yep.
By doing the wrong thing.
That's right. Yeah.
You know, and sort of not getting that direction right, or having to redo stuff. So yeah, it's so important, you know, to get all that stuff right. Yeah. So I hope that gives you guys a bit of a behind the scenes kind of look into, you know, sort of a production style environment. Yep.
And yeah, so now we're kind of like, we've gone for a bit longer on that.
We've gone for a bit longer,
way longer. But you know, anyway, I think that was kind of cool, right?
We can re-strategize our plan.
I mean, let's kind of.
Yep.
All right. So we've got.
So let's go into our discussion topic, which is sort of, which we don't really have a good title for. We're calling it inspiration. But it's mainly like things that we wanted to sort of discuss. And I mean, inspiration is key to what we're talking about. But I think you sort of described it as, you know, like what like being an artist and how that is a lifestyle, right? And, you know, just how you would sort of stay inspired, and how that kind of feeling of sort of being like sort of immersed or kind of involved in art full time, like all the time, is sort of really, you know, it's really key.
Yeah.
And just sort of talking around that issue again, sort of unpacking it. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, in terms of what does it mean? I mean, to me, this sort of concept is about just like when you're kind of daydreaming about art. And when you have some sort of spare time, you know, like just if it's sort of, like when you have spare time, you often do a thing, right? You know, and it may be like, you know, you might look for, you know, what video game you want, or, you know, like people are often into cars, look at like what they go and look at cars for sale. You know what I mean? That's the
this
thing
is what you do.
I've done this as well when I'm like not into, when I'm kind of like whatever, but I know people who are like, people who are really into cars. You know what I mean? It's this weird thing where it's like, do you do this too? Where you just look at cars for sale? And it's like, I do that too, you know, and it's like, it's almost so embarrassingly stupid to do that sort of thing, but you just sort of do that. Or you look at Instagram, you're not a fiend for art, or there'll just be a thing people are kind of interested in, you know, they're like looking for, I don't know, like interior decoration stuff, or, you know, just, you know, stuff like that, or clothes, or, you know, you have something where you're like, oh, I'm just kind of, this is what I'm thinking about, right?
Yeah.
And I think, you know, when you kind of are inspired about art, you know, that's kind of what you're thinking about, you know. You kind of go to sleep thinking about art, and you wake up thinking about art, and when you see things, you kind of relate it to art, and when you have conversations with people, you kind of want to talk about your art, like that's what you're thinking about, you know. If someone's like, oh, hey, how you going? And I think to a certain degree, like, this is why, you know, like a good number of my friends are artists, is because you just can't have the kind of conversations that you would like this, like what we the insane sort of minutia that we talk about here. Yeah, it's like, and we're sort of super excited about this stuff, but 99.999% of the population would just be like, what are you even talking about? You know what I mean? Like, this is so inside baseball that it's just ridiculous. But you know, that's kind of what we like talking about, you know, when we're sort of thinking about this stuff. So I don't know, I mean, that's sort of what I'm thinking about is like you're inspired, and you want to create art, and you want to sort of think about it and talk about it, and that, you know, other things are less important. For better or worse, you know.
And so what for you, what are some things that are inspiration? You know, what are things that you kind of are into that you find really helps with, you know, creating the art you do?
You mean like sort of like inspirational sort of sources? Or
are there things that you really kind of like, are they go-to things that you kind of, you know, into? Is it like checking out a really cool comic, or like, you know?
Yeah.
Or is it
I mean, I think
game stuff, or
I think in general,
or is it just looking at other art?
It's just looking at other art, you know, like that's mainly what I sort of do. because I mean, people often, I don't over intellectualize this stuff much. Like people are often sort of, you know, we're talking about Inktober, where some people really like themes and topics and stuff, and I've never been like this. I just always want to draw the same fantasy stuff that I've always wanted to do. And one of the key things we get students to do these days is do like an inspiration map or an influence map, where you kind of put all that stuff down there. So I generally like comics. Like I find that I keep coming back to comics, but I just sort of the stuff that kind of inspires me is mainly other art. You know what I mean? Because the things I'm interested in are fairly fantasy. You know, sort of. I'm not sort of drawing cars or mechs or that sort of thing where I can sort of look at reference that you know is out there in the world. I
literally don't know of a time where I like don't have ArtStation up or some, you know, like I don't know, Facebook, like that's what Facebook was invented for, right? Like looking at other artists' work. What else do you use it for? But like you said, 99% of the rest of the population would be like, what are you talking what are you talking about? Or like Instagram, it's like, isn't that just for looking at other people's stuff?
No, I think it is. And I mean, I think the program, I mean, I think someone was saying to me the other day, because like there was that like the hashtag sort of Me Too, which was, you know, an important hashtag and very sort of politically charged. And I think like my wife was saying, is your Facebook full of that? And I looked at my Facebook and I was like, nope.
Not really.
No,
some a little
it's
bit.
Just all art and people talking about stuff like that. And that's because I don't use, I mean, I've purposefully not used Facebook to interact with anything else besides art for like a long time, because it just, it's a total time sink, which is a completely other topic. It's a completely different
let's
topic.
not go down that rabbit hole.
But yeah, you know, like that's totally what I use this for. And like I don't get any of that other stuff, you know. And I much prefer like Instagram to Facebook, because it's just art. You know, an art station, because it's like don't have to. There's no people talking.
But I mean, other things that I think are really cool are like movies, you know. Real, like, I mean, so busy I don't get to many these days, but you know, going to movies and stuff and just, you know, getting inspired about like kind of, you know, shots and things, and me being kind of environment painter. I'm always like looking at that stuff in totally, you know, in films, and once again, you know, this day and age with the kind of ridiculous amount of VFX shots that are in every movie, I kind of sit there and go, well, I don't actually remember what the movie was about, because I'm just looking at all the individual frames. But and one of the other things I think that you can kind of do, and is like I think we've got on the, like, how do you immerse yourself as an artist? I remember I kind of already thought this, but I really remember a workshop in New Zealand where Greg Broadmoor was basically saying like he actually like went to go play in a band for a year and like didn't do any art, but he said that, you know, just he's a very observant kind of person, and you know, he'd just be going on the bus and he'd be looking at things and all that kind of stuff. And he said he was like, he literally didn't do art for a year. But he said when he picked up the pencil again after that year, he was better as an artist. Because he'd just been paying attention to things, and he was still thinking about art and how that, you know, relates to him. And I think like kind of part of immersing yourself is like just almost just paying attention to stuff and being like just, well, it's sort of always thinking about like seeing the art
see
side
it through
things.
through the sort of the film of art, right? So everything goes through that sort of focal
like
point.
a filter.
It does. It gets filtered by like, how would I draw this? Or that's an interesting, you know, be talking to someone and be like, this is an interesting person to draw. You know,
that's right.
This is an interesting idea that I could use in a story. You know, like that's cool because blah blah blah. And I guess that's what we're sort of talking about, is like, I feel like people, because we notice this is probably not, it's not something you would really talk about unless you sort of are in a teaching environment where you see people who kind of maybe are or aren't obviously inspired and excited about what they're doing. And it's very interesting that you can sort of have probably people are doing the same thing, and some people are like really enjoying it, some people aren't, right? Like a good example of that is the sci-fi or the fantasy stuff, right? Some people are like, yes. Other people are like, no, this is, you know, and so I think that's like a good example of like, I don't know whether there's a good answer to that, but it's obvious that your emotional relationship to what you're doing is kind of very much governed by some weird secret sauce. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
It's not sort of, it's not just like, I will just choose to enjoy this thing right now, you know, because it's like, no, that's...
yeah. No,
I guess just remember that we're not intellectual beings entirely. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of like emotional stuff, and I feel like artists get very in touch with that in general.
Yeah.
And I think you have to, because if you're not trying to be emotionally involved in the work you're doing, no one cares about it, really. You know, like so much of, and I feel like doing concept art and entertainment design, so much of the emotion we're trying to tap into is like, wow, that's epic and amazing.
That's right.
You know, so it seems
the mood, the drama.
Yeah, the drama, and so it seems very like sort of maybe like unsophisticated, because obviously there's a lot more moods and emotions out there, but you are still trying to get in touch with that, you know, that sort of basic like emotional thing.
I think the people that become really good artists are the ones that can convey those emotions to people, right? Like within their work, they can actually get someone to kind of feel something by looking at the painting that they did or whatever, right? And that's part of it. So we've got the journey here. Like, what are some of our stories? So do you have a time when do you have any times when inspiration was kind of tricky or anything, or like you know, kind of when you were starting out and things, or
yes,
yeah.
No, I've got lots of stories. I mean, we can talk about this stuff because I mean, I've actually had to do a lot of work on this to try and like, I feel like find tools or ways to explain things to people, especially kind of people who are just starting out, to kind of try and say like, look, this is a good way to think about these things, right? But certainly, I'll sort of go in and out of being sort of fully engaged with this stuff, and
that's cool, right? Like, it's not like right or wrong.
Sometimes
there's
sometimes it is. Sometimes it, you know, I think you have to analyze what makes you happy at the end of the day. You know what I mean? Like I feel like if I'm not doing art these days, if I don't do it for like a week, I don't feel good.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like I feel sick. Like something's seriously, like I feel anxious.
Yeah.
If I'm not doing it, like something's wrong. Like I haven't drawn today.
Yep.
You know what I mean? I'm just kind of like
yeah.
You know, like you know, so you kind of, I'm not fully engaged in anything else because I'm sort of sitting there going like, I just need to draw like something, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's because I've just done it so much that it's a habit, right? And a lot of this is not like, the inspiration is not something you're doing or something you have or don't have, right? It's kind of like we're trying to describe the, like a state of being and a state of mind. But yeah, there's certainly times when I was sort of struggling to find that, right, as an artist, and I definitely feel when I was and I wasn't. But for instance, I think a lot of it, and we can talk about this later, but like a lot of it is about balancing like input and output, right? So that you're not just kind of, you can be inspired, but you're not making anything. And I don't think that's very healthy. And you can be making things, but if you're not inspired, that's not healthy, right?
Sure.
You need that sort of balance, right, to get it right. And I think I've been in many situations where, yeah, you'd just be I'd be drawing stuff and I just be like, this is not working, you know what I mean? And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what caused that, or like how to sort of get in and out of that sort of mode of inspiration.
Do you think like over time and experience that has gotten easier to deal with?
Oh yeah, significantly so. Yeah. You just, but again, like it's that sort of thing where I think a lot of it is habit. So it kind of just gets better in like you move further towards that, because it's kind of, you sort of, and I often say this to people who are dealing with like productivity or procrastination things, is kind of, if you draw every day, at some point you'll forget how to not draw every day.
Sure.
And it's really just that simple. There's we're essentially creatures of habit.
Yeah.
So a lot of this is building that habit. But yeah, there's times when I would kind of like, I'm out of sync with art, right? And you kind of just, I don't look at paintings the same way, right? And I would notice, for instance, like there'd be times when I was, and this is sort of, when I was like in school or just out of school, like been working maybe for a year or doing freelance, and you don't get any work, and you're sitting there going, what's going on? And playing video games and being like, oh, how do I do this? And I want to draw a comic book, but I don't know how. And sort of like, what should I do? Should I write that sort of stuff? And being like, I kind of have energy, but I don't know where to sort of direct it. And I would sort of find there'd be times when that was happening and not happening, right? And there'd be instances like where I'd be painting like all night and all day, and you'd like pick up like a painting book by some plein air painter or something, and you kind of it's like you're like the Terminator or something, or just the colors and the brushstrokes and everything would just like explode, and you'd kind of see them all, right? And you'd be like, that's that brushstroke, and it was like this symphony, this orchestra of brushstrokes and color and form, and I'm kind of reading it all and whatever. And then you kind of go to sleep, and you kind of wake up and look at the same painting, and it's like, it's just a painting, right? Like, it's just a tree, But when you're like fully engaged in kind of art, is your brain just sees these things, and so you look at a painting and it's like, oh my god, And I think that's often when we get, a lot of people who are sort of, very competent with art is they're sort of showing people, here's movie stills and here's this reference and that kind of stuff, and you're sort of sharing this visual stuff. And if people are inspired, they're like, oh wow, that's really cool, I see what's going on there. And if they're not, they're just kind of like, oh yeah, ho hum, whatever, I'll just go on Facebook and look at some other thing that I'm interested in. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, that's the difference, right? Is like you instantly see something, and you see not just the surface of it, but like how it was created. The emotional, like how you could use that same thing. Like instantly, you're seeing so much more than just the painting, right? And
so it's kind of having like being connected with that kind of thing?
Being connected to some truer source, right? Like some universal artistic power, right? If you want to go into like the Alan Moore kind of philosophical, like idea space stuff, like, I think that stuff exists, right? Like that's what Alan Moore said, like treat art like a god, and you won't go far wrong. You need to pray to this thing. You need to worship it every day. You need to go in there and like treat it as if it is more powerful than you. You know what I mean? And even though we're just drawing fantasy stuff, right? It's still a matter of engaging with that visual language, right? And we can talk about the difference between visual, like sort of subverbal sort of being and sort of verbal intellectual being. And I think there's a big difference. I think that's one of the major primary things that causes people to not be engaged with art. But I would notice that thing where I'd sort of be like, one day I'd be like, life would be like this, and then the next day life would be like this, and kind of be, you couldn't get it back. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And sort of, so I spent a lot of time doing, for instance, like, I don't know whether people have probably heard of the book called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, by Betty Edwards, which, again, I always sort of preface that by saying, I'm not sure that, people are not sure whether it's right or left brain or whether that's scientifically valid or whatever. I think the thinking behind it is very profound and very interesting. And it's essentially talking about right or left brain. Like, one is your creative kind of, drawing brain, and the other is kind of more of your intellectual kind of verbal brain. And
I think is actually, like, if you're getting kind of technical about these things, and let's not do that, is that I think it's actually like more the front and the back, the way they kind of like separated, like it's
no one really knows, and it's different parts are on and all that stuff. But as a metaphor and as an abstraction, I think that's true, right? That is, there is like a huge amount of truth there, that these are different things, they're different modalities within your brain to work on. And I have people in my life who are very much into, like, hypnosis. I've done a lot of stuff on like NLP, hypnosis. The fact that, when you're sleeping, your brain's going to be in certain like wavelengths. You've got like
different
alpha,
modes,
theta,
kind of thing,
like delta. You've got different brain, like literally your brain is operating at a different level. And I think when you're in flow, and when you're in that artistic flow specifically, I think your brain is doing completely different stuff to if you're kind of trying to figure out whether to buy this milk or that milk or this bread or that bread.
And this is one of those reasons, guys, that you shouldn't be on bloody Facebook when you're like painting stuff, right? Or watching YouTube or something, because it's not, you just are not paying attention to what you should be paying attention to.
No, it's different modality. It's very difficult to pay attention to those things. But so I would sort of try and notice this, and I would try and because it's I think now it's kind of I would notice it more as like an increased engagement with art, right? Like you look at the painting and it's like I see all the brush strokes, right, and I can see them and I can see how I could make them, how they made them, right? Whereas otherwise it's like, oh, that's just a painting of some rocks, right? And that's why I feel like a lot of artists, you see those really good plein air paintings, and artists are like, oh my god, that's amazing, and most people are just like, yeah, that is a nice painting of some rocks, you know, but it's like no, but you know, oh my god, like, you know, well, it's just like you look at it and it's like shocking.
Well, this is one of those things where like you have a different outlook on stuff, where you know how like we've all had this before, where you basically do a job and you have these loose strokes and this stuff going on, and then like the creative director or someone will be like, oh, so just I'll give you another week to like hand up the finished one, and you're like, this is the finished one. But there's like, no, we want all the details in every, you know, thing, and you kind of like, there's that whole I actually think like artists see things like totally differently to
artists like sketchy things, because we can see the potential in it, like you were saying with that painting. We're like, that's right. I'm like, I like your half finished painting because I can see 10 paintings that could have been made out of that, and that's way more exciting than one painting. You know, that's like 10 is more than one. And it's exciting because there's like possibility, right? Like you have choice. Like I think I remember someone was saying like that the definition of sort of life is sort of choice, right? And I always get into philosophical arguments with people about this. I don't know why. This seems really fucking obvious to me. But like, the more alive we are, right, the more that we try and define ourselves as being like, I feel alive, right? People have like choice. You know, the more money people have, right, the more rich they are, the more famous they are, the more choices they have between things, right? And typically, not to say that's good or that will make you happy, but I think that's something that people strive for, is to have choice, right? Versus if you're a slave, for instance, you don't have choice, right? Someone else is making choice for you. And if you're a rock, we kind of define a rock as non-living, right? And a tree is sort of less living than, you know, like an animal, but we sort of define an animal as being less alive because it has less choice, right? And that's very deterministic, right? And that's not necessarily morally or ethically accurate, but I think that's one of those primary things that just instinctively humans say, the more choice you have, the more alive you are, right? And so I think as an artist, the more, when you're, one of the reasons I think that people like being artists is you kind of look at the blank page, right? And it's like, this thing has the most choice there is, right?
Which can be very scary.
And it can be scary, but that's what's fun, is saying, you know, I can be like, I can make anything I want.
That's right.
And there's unlimited choice. And I think there's a lot of sort of pleasure in that at a very base level, right? Because I think this is talking about base primal sort of human stuff. Do you know what I mean? Because it's not, you can't intellectualize it, right? Like you can't. We're sort of talking about like, I'm really excited about a painting of rocks, and now I'm not.
That's right. Like, so like, how do you, you know? So I guess that kind of leads into some of this, where it's like, you know, how can we overcome, say, artist block or a lack of inspiration?
A lack of inspiration. Yeah.
So well, like,
I mean, and again, I think there's those conscious inspirations, right? And then there's kind of feeling more in touch with drawing. But I feel like one of the places that this really shows up is if you're sort of beginning, the difference in the end result that you're able to achieve, right? The art that you're able to kind of manifest is directly related to how much you're able to be in the zone. And I think as a professional artist, right, what I define as being professional is like, maybe if you're not totally in flow, you can still create something that's okay, and you can certainly follow art direction and do all that kind of stuff, right? It's sort of not, but to really feel good about it, you probably need to be inspired and excited. Whereas when you're starting out, if it's not all going right, if the stars are not all aligned, often it's really, really not going to turn out well. And so it's more important for you to kind of stay in that point of focus. So one of the things I'd always do is I'd try and build as much habit, right, as much sort of thing that would sort of trigger me into that sort of you know, flow. So, you know, you could do things like finding the right type of music. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah, I did all sorts of stuff. Do you know what I mean? You can, I mean, you can listen to like binaural recordings, right? So you can basically,
what is that?
So you can get music, right, where I think you can essentially take any track, right, and you play it through stereo headphones. It has to be headphones. And what it does is it basically plays the sounds slightly delayed into each ear. And the degree to which it does that will basically put your brain into a certain phase, right? So you can put yourself into a theta rhythm, right? Or like all the different sort of rhythms, right? And that'll sort of relax you in a certain way. So, for instance, you know what I mean? Like you can do that. That is an option if you want to.
Yeah, I will go to sleep very quickly.
You probably would. You know what I mean? Because you turn off all those things. But like, you know, anyway, there's an example of something sort of weird that I would sort of try and do. And I'm like, I wonder whether this would make a difference. Really, a lot of it is just drawing, right? Like the way that you overcome a lot of these things is just to sort of not worry about an outcome as much and just sort of, again, like treat it as if it is something that needs to be worshipped, as if it is a god and you're just going to do it, and it's not really about you or the outcome, it's just about the process.
I think the phrase like the habit that you're talking about is that I think that's really important for a lot of these guys that are watching, which is a habit is something that you can do, you can improve upon, you can learn, you can grow, and the more things become a habit, the easier they become. You know, it's just like you think about it. If you want to go running, if you're someone that's very unfit and just watching Twitch all the time, and we've got people in the background sticking their hands up. So, you know, if you go out and you go like, I'm going to go for a 5-kilometer run, it's not going to end well the first go around. But if you keep doing it and you know, make that a habit every day, eventually you get, like you said before, where it was like, you kind of actually feel weird when you're not doing it.
Right? And that's the definition of a habit.
That's right. So I think
running is probably a good metaphor, because I feel like as soon as we talk about art, we sort of it's very easy to kind of see it as not as you get confused by the content. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
But if you look at running, like often one of the things I tell people about like how to build habit is like, and this becomes like with art or productivity, and if you use it running as a like a parallel metaphor. What I'd say is if you really struggle, right, if you've really tried, if you're really motivated and whatever reason you try run and it's like, for whatever reason, what I'd say is can you put your shoes on? Yes, you can probably put your shoes on. I'd say, okay, how do you want to run for? Oh, okay, I want to run for like half an hour. I'm like, okay, go put your shoes on and go outside and sit for half an hour. And then once you've sat there, like don't do anything else, just sit there, right? And then once you're done, take your shoes off, go back inside, right? Because it's got nothing to do with running, but you're starting to build a habit which is completely achievable, right? So pick something and like I'm saying, like people who really struggle, because running is like, well, the next thing would be like, okay, put your shoes on and like walk around in a circle. Do you know what I mean? Until you get tired, and then sit down and wait for the rest of the half an hour. Do you know what I mean? So you're building space for the habit, and you're building, you know, time for the habit, and you're actually doing it. And what you need to do is just turn off any reasonable expectation that you're going to run, and just focus on, if I do X, Y, Z, and I know that it's completely achievable, then I can get that positive feedback, right? And that's where you kind of are likely to bypass a lot of the negative associations you might have had with running or the habit stuff. So build the habit first. And I'd say the same thing with people where they draw, right?
I think that's a really awesome analogy, because it's sort of like it's kind of showing that a lot of times when people get sort of artist block, or they get a bit worried about things, is that they're just setting themselves up for failure, right? They're like, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to create the best thing that I've ever done in my life. You know,
just like, okay,
but I haven't done it for
time to run a full marathon.
Correct.
You know, no worries. I bought some
floating
shoes.
rocks, spaceships, Death Star. It's all happening.
It's all happening, right? And I'm going to create the best thing.
And then you sit down, and of course, guess what? You can't do it. Right? And that becomes like a real emotional block. To then,
well, what you're doing is
where you get this stuff.
You're building a habit for being emotionally upset. You know, and what you're doing is you're building a relationship between you having inspiration and doing this thing that's entirely negative, right? And there's lots of things that I can, because again, we've talked a lot about in classes and stuff about sort of choosing projects wisely, right? But that is one of the major things, is that
I think you're giving fitness advice here, Tim. Everyone's thinking about going out for a run. They're like, screw this art stuff. Let's just go marathon running.
Yeah. But that's the thing is, and I say the same thing for drawing is like, for instance, I think one of the major things that people find frustrating is they're doing art, they like art, they come to study or they're trying to study or they're working and they don't give themselves time to do their personal work.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, and often people like have real trouble doing it because again, they'll sit down and they won't get focused, or they'll just be shuffling their brushes around, you know what I mean, doing that kind of stuff, or they'll start something and they'll run out of time and they won't finish it, you know what I mean. So I'm always like, reduce the level of complexity until you are very sure you can achieve that goal, which sounds like, just lower your expectations until you achieve something, which is kind of like, a joke meme about productivity and stuff. But I think that's true, because what you want to do more than anything else that will help your inspirational attitude to art is you want to make your relationship to art good. And you want to make sure that you build that relationship, how you feel about it, right? And the same as you would have a relationship with anyone, you have a relationship to art, and you need to feel good about it. You need to feel like, I really like doing this.
Yeah.
It makes me happy. And when I go and do it, I'm able to achieve things, you know what I mean? And I'm able to do stuff. And I think one of the first things people do is they imagine these big things, because everyone imagines these big things, and then they try and do it and it fails, and then you're just building this abusive relationship with yourself and art, right? And that, more than anything, I think is what trips people up. So the number one thing I'd say focus on your relationship and your emotion versus like goals, right? So your goal shouldn't be to create XYZ art. Your goal should just be to like spend time building that relationship. And like, a really simple thing that's actually practical as a takeaway is like, just, I often say, just write a list of all the things you like drawing, like you really like drawing, that are not someone else telling you should draw this. It's just like, these are things you really, really like drawing. Like castles on a hill, or elf girls, you know what I mean? And it's like, I've drawn these things so many times. It's kind of embarrassing that I keep drawing this thing, but I just kind of like doing it. It's funny
how we all, like, everyone who's been doing this for a while has this same thing. There's no logic to it. Like, but you just, I don't know, it's that thing you like doing. You just want to keep doing it over and over again until you create the most epic one ever.
Yeah, but just go do that, you know what I mean? And there'll often be a list of things that once you do that, it's like there's other things, and you kind of forget this because often we get caught up in the aspirational stuff of like, I want to create all these things, and we focus on, as we should, what's hard. I'm going to challenge myself. But a lot of what will help you build good relationships with art is to do stuff you actually enjoy, right? Which obviously is going to be inside your comfort zone. So I think that's the thing, is like when you're trying to, if you feel like you're not inspired, I think you have to get back inside your comfort zone, right? To kind of then build the energy to kind of go out and test the boundaries again, And I feel like people can get seriously in pain, like physical, mental pain and discomfort if they're kind of constantly pushing the comfort, that sort of comfort zone. And not actually spending time creating something, you know what I mean? Because it's sort of, it's just not as fun, you know?
Yeah, no, that's right. So I guess, I've got some notes up on here like burnout. Obviously there's sometimes you can.
Have you ever burnt out? Have you ever done?
see. Well,
many times.
Like, what? No, right? No. The answer is no. And so Tim and I, like, sometimes we'll prep for the show and talk about some of this stuff. And, one of the things that I'm pretty famous for around here is basically like whenever there's a big event, I'm like gigantically sick because, I've just kind of pushed myself to the extreme. But you know what is that I would never actually say that that's anything to do with being burnt out. It's more just like I'm trying to achieve a goal and I try to like bend time to like make that happen. So it's a little bit different. And Tim always makes a joke of like I'm the worst person to give advice about leading a
work-life balance.
Work-life balance.
Although I'm sure you do. You actually probably do a fairly good job of it, relative to how much work you do and how much life you do.
So but
well, maybe not now, because again, like now you're doing sort of different stuff. But if you were sort of like doing stuff when you were starting freelancing and stuff like that.
I think there's definite times where things definitely get tough, like because you feel like you want to improve, but there's not enough hours in the day to improve to where you want to get to.
Yep.
And so you start like working until 4 a.m. in the morning and then getting up early again and like, you know, doing the grind. And then you've got other family stuff going on and you've got to, you know, like, and there's points in my life where I've had a part-time job because, you know, I had to like, you know, because life happens and you do all these things. But I think the main thing is just to keep a clear goal's the wrong word, but sort of pathway of what you want to kind of do, and then put things in place that allow you to achieve that.
Yep.
Those things are not always easy. They can be very difficult, right? But if you and like,
I guess what you're talking about is knowing whether or not the discomfort is going to be worth it, because you know it's going to like achieve some sort of something down the road. And
I think all people that have kind of done this as a job potentially have there's self-doubts along the way of like, am I actually going to be able to do this? I'm sure everyone has had many people telling them that they can't do it, you know, and they shouldn't do it. And why are you doing this? I am a very stubborn person. Like, you know, if we're rating a scale of 1 to 100, I'm right up there. So
it's like the more someone tells you can't do it, the more it's just going to happen.
Is this going to happen?
I'll show you.
But and I use that to, like, everyone's got a different tolerance for that stuff. And for me, I try and I've always just tended to use that as motivation rather than as a negative emotion, to be like, this is like, for sure, sometimes it'll like get you down, but I've found that the overwhelming way that I deal with things is more just like, okay, I'm going to get back up and I'm going to try harder and I'm going to use that to help me, you know, focus my efforts in this.
I think we've talked about this before, but I feel like a lot of artists who are our age, who have come from Adelaide, probably have like some sort of major persistence, like stubbornness
issues.
Just like, fuck you, don't tell me what to do. I'm going to become an artist. You can't tell me I can't become an artist. You know what I mean? I'm not going to get a day job. I'm not going to wear a suit. You know what I mean? Because there's no CDW. There's not much good art education in Australia. So if you were like wanted to be like, I want to draw video games and blah blah, everyone would be like, oh, that's a dumb idea, and then you just stopped, you know. And that's one of the things that's really the main reason I like teaching stuff is because you know, like talking about inspiration, I mean, teaching helps me because I see all these people getting better and I'm like, oh damn, you know, I better get better too, because you know, there's these like 21-year-olds who are like way better than I was, you know what I mean, when I was 21. That's like inspiring, do you know what I mean? Because it's like, it gets you back in touch with the with that sort of, you know, like approach. But you kind of see this.
So
like,
you guys are really inspiring us, that's for sure.
No, seriously, and it just reminds you like, oh wow, you know, it's so much fun to improve, you know. But I forget exactly what I was saying there. But I was just sort of talking about...
and the last bit is sort of like have fun and how to keep things fun and stuff.
Well, I think that there was some stuff that I was sort of thinking about in terms of like sort of how you like, again, like keep that work-life balance. Do you know what I mean? Like I think that's sort of that's really important. But I think what I was sort of thinking there is that I feel like you have to know what you're good at, right? And I feel like probably you are someone who, if you weren't really challenged and you didn't have someone saying, this is really hard, you know what I mean? And you're trying to do something that most people wouldn't be able to do, that I don't think you'd turn up. Like if you'd sort of, no, I think if it was like, oh, here's like an easy life, right? Like just become a freelancer, just do this, you know what I mean? Don't try and start a school. Don't try and start, you know, all this kind of stuff. I think it wouldn't be as inspiring for you, you know what I mean? And I think that's because you have that personality to it, you know, like that's that stubbornness, right? It's like, you're like, I reckon I could do this, and I reckon I could find a lot of people who would tell me I couldn't do this. And
so let's just do it.
That sounds really childish and dumb, but I think that is actually one of the biggest life hacks you can have, is to understand what your natural proclivity for motivation is, and to just keep putting yourself in that situation, right? And it's like, it sounds really dumb. It's like, but I feel like often when people talk about initially about, oh, I need like productivity and motivation, and, you know, why do people have the expectation that they should be able to do a thing for a particular reason? And I feel like a lot of people have this expectation that like, oh, I should be, and I think a lot of students struggle with this, where they're like, yeah, I'm burnt out, or why can't I just push through and create art? And it's like, because no one can.
Mm-hmm.
No one can create amazing art when you're dead tired and like not feeling good, or you're sick, or you're worried about this other thing. Like, why you think that's the case? And I feel like a lot of people think I should be able to be motivated and successful and productive just because.
Yeah. Sure.
Without having someone say, if you don't do it, then you won't have any money and you won't eat food. It's like, well, that's a base motivation, but that's what motivates most people these days to do most things. Is fear of failure, fear of some magical institution saying you failed, or someone saying you no longer have a job, so therefore you can't eat, and that gets people up.
It does.
Early in the morning.
Sure,
I mean, it's insane. Everyone gets up in the morning and drives to work and does this. I'm just like, really? Everyone? Why don't they just go, nah, I can't be bothered, It's because you'll get fired and then you'll starve to death. It's really simple. But I think if you can figure out what really gets you excited in general, and you can pay attention to those scenarios where you tend to really get up and go, just keep doing that to yourself. I find... If you put me along, and I'm in this sort of situation at the moment where I kind of don't have any freelance, I don't really have any projects on at the moment. I know there's heaps of things I want to do. And I just die away and kind of get really bored and apathetic. I'm not productive, right? I'm not a workaholic. If I just kind of have a very reasonable job to do. Like if I schedule out a job and I know I can do that. Anyone could do that. I just am not interested. And I know that about myself. And before that would frustrate me because I'd be like, as soon as I schedule too much work, I get super excited about it. And then I'm like, oh, God damn it. That's a lot of stuff to do. I've got so many things, and I'll give myself 5 things to do. And then I'll be like, oh my God, there's so many. And it kind of motivates me to work on one of them. And that's when I feel like I'm sort of that's what gets me to be productive. If I don't do that, I'll just sit around all day and just be like, oh, I don't know.
So it's kind of learning a bit about yourself and how it kind of works, and then just kind of running with that. That kind of the strategies that come with that. I know we've been having a bunch of questions, so sorry guys if we haven't kind of got to them all. But I think we kind of covered a lot of the things that you guys were kind of talking about. And but if you do have any other questions, please.
Well, we can talk about if we get a chance to do a demo later on, which maybe we will, maybe we won't.
For sure.
Know. But look, I think that's really important, and I think if you see a lot of people, I think often people whether because I know I'm I don't know whether stubborn, but I'm very persistent, and I think I've always been that way, where I can be really, really, really annoying. This about me, right? When it's if it's sort of one thing that I want, if I want a thing in a thing, I'm just a total dick about it. And I'll just be like, we need this in the show. So it's like, oh, no. And it's like, oh, I think this. And I'm like, no, we need this, And it's sort of, I can see myself doing it. And I'm like, oh, you shouldn't be that pushy. You should just let things go by. But I feel like that's something that's helped me. You know what I mean? And I think it could be very easy for people to say, oh no, I shouldn't do that. You know what I mean? I shouldn't be, maybe I should just be more, maybe I shouldn't, maybe I should just do what people tell me. Do you know what I mean? Maybe I shouldn't, why do I need to be so stubborn? I'm causing lots of stress, maybe I should just do what other people want, whereas if you know that you have the energy to sort of do that, then use it, And I think a lot of people don't have that. They need everything to be relaxed, whatever it is, I'm just saying we probably are biased that way because of we're here and you know what I mean? Whereas I think a lot of people maybe just need, more relaxation or a better sort of environment or whatever. They don't want the stress. They don't want to have 10 million things to do, whatever it is, you need to know what actually is going to put you in the right frame of mind to kind of, be motivated. Even within kind of just the artist community, you see people that really like freelancing. You see people that really like working in a studio. You see people that really like working at night. You see people that, everybody's different. There's all things, and you've got to kind of there will be a time when you kind of, with a bit of experience, you kind of work out what, how you kind of work and how that goes. But
But yeah, I think all those things. I think we should probably wrap some of this up. But I think there's a lot of really cool things to take away from this about inspiration and kind of like some of the kind of art life balance things and stuff like that. So we've got a couple of questions here. I find it hard to do commissions. I usually only do art for friends and family at this stage, and sometimes I don't even charge them. There is an element of worrying. There is an element of worrying that my art isn't good enough. Oh, yeah. Sure. Yeah, and that can take some time to get comfortable with doing things, and it's one of those things where even just working for clients and things is like building a habit of doing those things and getting jobs finished and out the door, and that becomes a habit, becomes something you get used to doing. So yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about that. I do little things for family and friends to get comfortable with
I think find what works for you and pay attention to does it work for you to just for instance, I think a lot of people just need that kind of push, you know what I mean? They just need someone. A lot of it comes from someone else, fear of failure, people, you're in a studio and you've got other people who are relying on you, and that's immensely motivating for people and they feel really good about it. I'm not like that, I like doing stuff on my own, and that's sort of quite exciting, but just that never goes away.
Yeah. And I think the start of this question was it difficult for us to start doing commissions? Did you feel like you weren't at the level for getting paid for your art? I know you kind of started getting a job at the game company, right? Was that was kind of like the first
that was the first thing I think I ever did. Yeah.
And
I often say to people, I have not earned a cent in my entire life for doing anything besides art. Ever. I have no idea how to work a cash register, or I'm completely useless at doing anything except art. And that was very tricky for a lot of years. And I meant many years not making any money. You know what I mean? But so, I know a lot about kind of, worrying about that intensely, no plan B, just I don't know. What do you mean? I'm just, hopefully this will work out, but maybe it won't. And I feel like I was just very stressed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if I could go back and do it again, one of the things, it's not just I feel anxious, and I feel like so many students are like this. It's I feel like what it is you really care. Like the person talking in the chat, right? It's what it says to me is you care whether your art is good enough. And if you didn't, you wouldn't be here. Right, I always make that joke because, there's plenty of artists who think they're really good, and they stopped trying, 10 years ago, and they're all shit. You know, every single one of them. There's not many people who are I'm awesome, who are awesome. It just doesn't happen. The ones who are good are the ones who are always there's something I could improve. Maybe is this good enough? You know what I mean? Those are the people who always get better because they just keep doing that. And all the ones who are have a bit of a this is good enough. They don't get good, but. Certainly,
and I think all those crazy guys you see on ArtStation, all that is they're all like that. They're all because we've met a lot of them.
I've met so many. I'm still waiting for one who's hey, screw you guys, I'm awesome.
I'm the
best.
You
know what I mean? I just
they're all just I'm going to these classes. I'm learning this. I didn't know how to do. Oh man, this thing sucks. So
the better they are, the more they worry about that stuff. Do you know what I mean? And the more they care about the demo they're doing and what you think about it and whether it's good enough. You know what I mean? That's just life. I think if you stop doing that, you'll probably stop getting good. And you'll probably stop enjoying it. Because often we're doing art for other people. But I'd say if I could go and do it all again, I'd just stress out less about blowing my deadlines. Because this, literally, it's hard to explain. We're not exaggerating. Every single top tier professional big name artist who comes here is always oh yeah, when I'm doing my paintings, I'm not sure whether it's going to work. Every single one, you know, and they're all oh my God, this is turning out awful, and you'll be looking at it being what are you talking about? And they're sitting there going, they're literally in a state of stress and heightened awareness. Maybe it's not necessarily oh, I hate myself, this is awful.
No, that's right.
But they're certainly You know, I'm fully engaged in making sure this is the best I can do it. You know what I mean? There's no like kind of you know, none, right? And like, you know, I can use an example of like when I first did my first book, the first like 7 Pirates, right, for like the French company, and I was terrified. Like for 2 years, I basically lived in mortal fear that I would blow this deadline and I would never work in comics ever again, and it would be embarrassing and my entire life would be over. And I would sort of focus way too much on that. Do you know what I mean? And maybe that helped me do it. I mean, I think I still blew the deadline a bit, but it was kind of the editor knew what I was doing, so I was able to communicate with them. You know, I wasn't like, oh yeah, it's all done, and it's not done. But yeah, that was like hugely stressful for me to be in that position, and I was just like, if I don't finish this book on time, I will never work in French comics ever again, and my career will be over, and I'll have to get another job. Like, this is my one chance. And instead of enjoying that process, I kind of spent most of the time just like freaking out, you know, and that's always the case. And then I did another thing where I like wrote my comic as well, and I was just like, oh my God, maybe no one will ever let me write a book again. You know what I mean? And you know, like, that's just how it is. I think you're always worried about that. You know, like, is this going to be good enough? Or, you know, is this, even if I'd done 3 books, I'm like, is this going to be good enough to make sure I can keep doing this? You know, like, or, you know, is this going to be harder, or is this going to be easier? Like, you know, stuff, it gets less dramatic, but I don't think there's any point where it's sort of, you know, like, there's no point at which anyone is, you know, these people are making, I would say, huge amounts of money. They have huge amounts of likes on ArtStation and Instagram. Like, there's no, you know, there's no doubt that they are successful. That's right. Great artists that everyone loves, and still they're sort of saying, I'm not sure. Right? So there's no degree of skill you can attain that will ever make you think, I'm going to be great at this commission.
So
period.
It's just
end of conversation.
So it's just, I guess it's just getting used to that, like, uncomfortableness, and just, you know, going that's part of the process.
I think, again, and it's having a relationship to it where, you know, it's like sort of skydiving, you know, like, you're either, some people don't like it, and a lot of the not liking it is you anticipating yourself dying, right? Whereas if you focus on the positives, it's fun, you know, because and I think there is that attitude.
I'm definitely in the no camp. Where's the positives? I don't understand jumping out of a plane.
I don't either. but like, you know, you kind of, it's with extreme sports or something, you sort of start to enjoy the adrenaline, right? And you start to kind of enjoy the possibility of different things happening. And I think it's just attitude and relationship to it. So it's not that thing where you're like, I'm so stressed that I'm actually affecting the work. It's that I'm gonna wake up all my senses and get really excited about this. So that I make sure it's going to go well. Do you know what I mean? And that you basically know there's a feeling that you have when things are going well. Do you know what I mean? Where it's like, I feel like this is probably as good as it's going to get. And the other thing that I say about this will be the last thing I'll say, and then you can say, is that I think, like, one of the biggest differences between artists who are, like, you know, you would call professional or really good, and artists who are still sort of working on things, is often, if you're still beginning out, you can be quite a good artist, but if you encounter a problem with an image, like the composition is not quite working, it sort of manifests as a slight unease, or a feeling of like, there's something wrong with this, right? Something's not going right. And instead of being a professional artist who's just like, yes, this is because the composition is failing for this reason. I've been here 10 times before. I know exactly what to do. I just do this. Oh, I did it. That problem and that feeling just disappears, right? Whereas when you're beginning, you're like, uh-oh, this isn't working. You know, just alarm bells are going off, and you have no idea how to fix this, right? You have no idea how to make this image better, and it is going wrong. And this means you're going to get fired from your job, or you're going to not get any more commissions, or this person who's paying you $20 to draw some fan art is going to be like, you suck. I'm never getting fan art from you again, and that's going to be the end of the world, you know? Whereas, you know, if you're a professional, you just kind of fix it and it's done, right? So it's your relationship to the problem and how much that stresses you out, right? And how you sort of feel like, oh, that's interesting. It's not working. Okay, maybe I'll think about this. You know, maybe I'll take a walk, or, you know, just not letting it overwhelm you. You know what I mean? Which is very tricky, because I think when you're
Well, it's tricky because you basically don't have the problem-solving capabilities to finish the task, right? And that's what like kind of finishing paintings or designs or whatever does, is that it starts giving you all these like problem-solving tools that you can use to finish things, right? Yeah.
Yep. And one of the things is when you're in that freeze, you're in that artistic sort of mode, is that you're highly activated. Like all your emotional senses are online, right? Your care factor is high about everything, you know? And so it's very easy for like just those edges to bleed, right? For like, the painting's not going well, I'm not going well, my life is not going well. It's like they're the same thing, because I really feel like people engage a lot of those fight or flight sort of, you know, like, oh, this is not good. You're engaging a lot of like hardcore emotional stuff deep down to get you motivated to fix the painting, right? Like, you know, it's not just that, oh, this isn't a good painting. It's like, I'm not good, right? You're using that motivation of
for sure.
Yeah.
Whereas I think with more experience, it's less of like the, you know, dire earthquake consequences. More like the painting's wrong.
Yeah,
I've done something. How do I just...
I'll have to keep fixing it. Or I'll have to keep working on it. Or I might need to, you know, my boss might be annoyed because it'll take me an extra few hours to do a really good job on this. Or, you know, oh, I can make this better, but this is going to take longer than I thought. You know, it's not like, oh my God, my life may be over soon.
That's right.
That's the difference, right? But it's not that the feeling is different. It's just your relationship to it's different.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, I think... let's sort of wrap up the talking there.
Yes.
And I think what we'll do is just have a 5-minute break, and we'll come back and we'll do some critiques. And then if we have time, I think Tim's going to do a bit of a demo. So, but we'll see how we go. Yeah. All right. No worries, guys. So we'll have a little break, and we'll see you back soon.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right, guys. So we're back from break and ready to get into some critiques. So yeah, let's just get straight into it. So this is a piece from Tom Merton, and it says it's a cover page for his comic book project in one of the classes here.
Yep.
Any advice you can offer to help improve would be great.
Yep.
I think maybe can hand this one mostly over to you, Tim, but I did want to say, like, Tom, if you're listening, I'm not actually sure if you're in the stream right now, but like just the improvement over the last year or whatever of your work has been, really big. And it's awesome, really awesome to see like how much improvement, has been taking place. So it's great. And the first thing I'll say about this is it looks really cool. Like, I think it's a really striking image and like layout for the composition. So I think it's great. I don't know, do you have any sort of like thoughts, Tim, on just general stuff?
I'd say that what you want is you want, if it is actually a comic book, we're sort of thinking of it as a comic book cover, because you can think of it from that perspective, or you can think of it as a piece of art. I think as a piece of art, I think it works pretty well. It's like sort of simple. It's sort of like effective. Do you know what I mean? I think the general idea is kind of good. And there's things that we could suggest to maybe make it better from a painting or a lighting perspective, but that may sort of affect the style. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's hard to know sort of how much to sort of adjust those things. But I'd say you probably want a larger logo, like a larger kind of stronger logo to kind of, which I like how it's kind of blended into the sun. Do you know what I mean? But it could be sort of hard to read. And generally what you want with a cover is kind of just like, bam, you can tell which book it is. Do you know what I mean? So from like a design perspective, I think that's sort of pretty important. So probably like larger font. Do you know what I mean? Like sort of stronger.
Well, maybe move everything down a bit or something so you can get the font a bit bigger.
Yep. Like because I like how it's sort of blended in from an artistic standpoint, but from a like, even just from
from an IP standpoint.
Well,
I'm joking.
Just from a like, you're trying to sell this at a convention table. You know what I mean? It's not even on a bookshelf. You kind of want to be able to easily identify the logo. You know what I mean? That's why all of those kind of logos are so sort of iconic. So I'd try like sort of just stronger font. In terms of the image, I think it's like pretty cool. I kind of get the general idea. One of the things is we kind of have shadows from the sort of like structure, the crashed spaceship or craft or whatever's in there. Obviously that's kind of what you need, because we have this giant planet sun thing behind it. But if there's shadows, you would probably also see some sort of highlights on the actual structure itself. And I think that's where maybe it's a matter of like, to what degree are you going to keep it iconic and sort of graphic, or to what degree are we going to kind of render it? You know what I mean? Because I think it works okay as is. You know what I mean? I've seen much worse covers, you know what I mean, on sort of people's, comic books and that sort of stuff. But I'd say something you could sort of think about just from a really sort of simple sort of standpoint, is just sort of, do you want to put lighting in there? You know what I mean? Because certainly, even if this was just sort of graphic, right, you could probably, play around with, putting sort of some, right, like some sort of lighting that's going to help. Even if this was sort of a typical comic book sort of drawing, right, where there's no tone, like we're not sort of painting it, right, you could still kind of think about how you would kind of maybe, create some sort of stuff in here. And I'm just sort of being fairly abstract to kind of make it feel as if there's sort of more depth. But I kind of like the blackness of it, and I think that's like a very important part of the overall image. Do you know what I mean? But certainly it might be worth thinking about, even if you kind of tone a lot of that stuff down, right? Just thinking about sort of pulling some of that stuff out to kind of help push the detail that, you know, I think should be in there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just some stuff like that might kind of help give it some depth. And obviously you can do, you know, some more of that as well. You know, think about maybe that there would be some extra kind of structures or, you know, things in here. Again, they don't have to be graphic, but, you know, if you don't want it to be painted, then you could keep it graphic. The other thing I'd say is I'd probably say more sand on things. Right?
Yeah, I think that bit on the left is really cool, right?
Yeah, and I think that really sells that this has been here for a while. So, you know, sort of like more sand on things, like really kind of selling that.
Getting swept up into all of that.
Yeah, where it's kind of like, you know, it's really sort of, you know, in everything, you know, because sand does do that, you know, those sort of sand dunes, things don't last that long. So I think the more you can do that, and think about how these sort of abstract, like, you know, overall larger shapes you're sort of creating by a bunch of smaller shapes are going to sort of flow into the image. You know, don't just be like, I'm going to add a whole bunch of stuff and then it'll look awful. Because I think the thing is, the reason I'm not like, do this, do that, is because it looks pretty good, you know what I mean? As is. But that's sort of the major stuff I'd start thinking about. And yeah, just kind of probably I'd just clean up some of these little things a little bit, and also just think about, again, frequency of detail. We've got some of these sort of lines here, right, that are small. So I'd say if there are other places where you can sort of see the silhouette, right, and you would potentially have other lines that are that small, then I think you could have put them on there as well. And that would just sort of give it that sort of level of scale that I think maybe, you know, he's sort of after, right? That sort of, like, you know, that's sort of like a larger thing. So just some sort of simple hints. But again, I think it's a really good thing about it is I think he's chosen to do an image that he can execute. You know what I mean? Like, you've kept it simple. And I think that's one of those things that often causes people drama and anxiety is they're trying to create something like, oh, it's, you know, I couldn't render every single detail. Do you know what I mean? Like, the image works really well even if we haven't rendered all these things. Do you know what I mean? Even if the lighting isn't 100% realistic. Sure. It's just a strong image, which I think is super, super important. So anyway, those are just a few things, but nothing like where I would sort of be like, let's move the whole thing around. Yeah, so it's really cool, Tom. So I think it's great stuff. Yeah. So all right, let's have a look at Jeff. All right, so playing around with the long arm military designs and practicing my presentation skills. Yeah, cool. So yeah, I think they're cool. I think so we've both known Jeff for quite a while and given him feedback for quite a while. Yeah. I think they're cool. I think they're at a Jeff level of where they're kind of like sketchy and looking cool. So like always, Jeff kind of just want to see you get in there and like kind of finish some of this more
stuff
detail,
up, right?
Yeah.
Which is just take it from that loose sketch and really like I think for you, Jeff, is like some of the things that we've been talking about today are like really important. You know, which is just getting that mileage in of kind of getting things achievable done so that you're not, you know, having anxiety issues about doing it in the first place, which I think is kind of happening. You know, so the initial sketches and things you do, like, are always looking really cool. Looking really strong.
I think these are good. And I think it's just a matter of like, cool. Yeah. Where's the next step? Where's the next thing? I think one of the issues, like one of the things is I think the presentation is good, but I think the presentation is like what you would want for like the next stage.
That's right.
Right. And probably what I'd say is like what the background does is it makes the characters look less finished than they are. And that's maybe not what you want for the presentation, but I think the presentation looks like good. Like I think it works. But if you had something that was even, you know, it doesn't have to be a final render, but something that's kind of a little bit more polished. One of the things I'd say, like one of the reasons I just use flat backgrounds on doing character stuff is because it allows art directors to chop them up themselves. Do you know what I mean? Like without sort of having layers and stuff. So if I do use, for instance, you know, if you have the same flat background here, you could like, you know, I could easily sort of, you know, chop the top of this guy off and sort of stick it on here. And that may be a thing an art director kind of wants. So it's like the presentation at this stage is actually not important. what's important is sort of ideas and that sort of thing. So that's sort of something I'd say in terms of the presentation is like, I think this is like super effective for the next stage where you could be like, hey, look how much more production value this gives you. Whereas at this stage, it probably makes the characters look more sketchy than they are. Right. And it just makes it harder for an art director to kind of write notes and things on it.
It's interesting. I mean, it's interesting because it must be kind of confusing for students because we're always like presentation, and then like do the presentation. It's like less presentation, but I guess it's like I totally get what you're saying, and it's a fine kind of balance. I think like in terms of the overall feeling of what you're doing, Jeff, like it's good, right? Like it's all on the right track. Yeah, it just I think just with the characters, it'd just be cool to see them get a bit more finished because at the moment this is just like a mush of a gun, you know. But like you just want to be like, wow, what is it? And like you can do line work; it doesn't have to be painted. I mean, do we still, even just like with Tim's here, right? Like where they're just having that line work and it's like not a super detailed color pass, right? It's just kind of blocking in some basic form and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, what this is, because again, not to be like just do this, don't do that, is I've just had so much practice using that really simple, dumb style and technique, and we were talking about that when we had like Tyler Bartley on, where he just has like a really simple process. But you just keep throwing stuff at that process, and you just get so used to it that you can actually go quite fast. Is that I would say the initial rough sketch that I did for those is like less detailed than this. So if you kind of just go for it and just say, you know what, instead of using a big brush that I can be sketchy with, you know what I mean? Maybe just pick like a brush that's like, you can't sketch with. Right, and just say, you know what, I'm just going to like, really focus and just try and create something that's clean. It may be a bit wonky, but the presentation overall will be a bit better. Whereas I think these are sort of like sketchy, and that's all I'm doing differently is I'm saying, you know what, I'm going to create a sketch, but it's going to be inaccurate, but it's going to be clean. You know what I mean? And that's that. I know that sounds really, it's like easier said than done, but if you practice that, you'll get better at it, right? If you practice trying to be clean, you'll get better at being clean.
I mean, I don't actually know if that's Jeff's main thing. No. I think it's more just like I know what you're saying.
It is.
I think it's kind of getting into the details. Oh, time's up.
Yeah. So I just say get into the details, and I mean, one of the things I'll say is that taking an image from this level up in detail is tricky because you have to decide how much the sketch is actually giving you. And I'm sure we've talked about this before, probably with Jeff. He's heard me sort of say this before, right? Is like people often imagine, oh, the sketch is really good, therefore the finished image is good. And it's like, well, only if you realize what bits of the sketch you can carry forward into a finished drawing to help the finished drawing look good. And if you practice putting in the details, right? If you just practice drawing techie stuff, you can actually put a lot of it in anyway. And that's a lot of it is just practicing a certain detail level. And I think Jeff has gotten really, really, really good at doing stuff at this detail level.
I think so too.
And I would just say like kind of keep practicing the next step, right? Because and I think one of the problems is when you do this, we're kind of expecting the next step to be super clean. And what I'd say is don't worry about the next step being super clean in terms of like everything's refined and everything's sorted out. Just try and do like an intermediate step where you're kind of drawing the faces, those little mechanical hands have got some, like doodads and, sort of articulation. Doesn't have to be super like, doesn't have to be like precisely knotted out and constructed. But he's done enough of that I reckon he could probably just work on the intermediate step, which is where you're kind of fudging detail. You're suggesting detail, which is exactly what I'm doing. If you go back to those ones I did, it's basically I'm just very good at making you not look where I haven't drawn stuff good. So for instance, like there's like lots of sort of areas where you know, like the gun, for instance, where, you know, you look at some of the details on the gun and it's kind of like there's just sort of stuff there, you know, and I don't really know what's going to be there yet, but I do know that probably I wouldn't be designing the gun anyway, because that's what you'd probably have a weapon concept artist do that. And also, if I'd need to, I can just do that later. You know, another thing would be like this guy's, the guy with the yellow sort of cape things, mechanical arm. You know, that's just complete nonsense. There's nothing there. That's got nothing, right? But I'm just like, yeah, I probably just won't render it much. You know what I mean? You get the feeling that it's going to be mechanical arm. I've drawn enough sort of detailed ones that even if I'm kind of half, you know, I'm like, I've got 20 seconds to draw that arm. I'm just like, oh, it looks good enough. You know what I mean? He has a mechanical arm. You kind of get it. And what I'm doing is I'm saying next, right? Now I'm going to draw this next guy who's going to be a completely different idea. You know, I'm not worrying about that. And it's just a matter of sort of practicing, right? Like a lot of these weapons are like that. If you actually zoom up, there's nothing really there. You know, it's kind of, what even is that thing? I don't know. You know, but either I can just draw another one or whatever, you know. And there's lots of areas of this image which are sort of not refined, like, you know, the guy's backpack, for instance. You know, who knows what that thing is or what's going on. He's actually meant to have like that stuff at the back is kind of a helmet that's meant to come forward, but I was like, I don't know. I mean, can you see it there? I don't know. If we actually pick this idea because we like this, you know, I'd probably spend another couple of days, you know, sketching and drawing it out. So it's about ideas, and you kind of need to. I think that with a lot of concept art, just developing your levels of detail, where you're sort of like, you know, this is like a 2-hour character, right, or a 3-hour character. And just figuring out like how to sort of get away with as much mischief as possible to make it feel as if it's more finished than it is. That's a lot of what sort of concept art is sort of saying like, this is cool, focus here, don't look at this, you know. It's
kind of why photos and all that kind of got started in the first place, because you could just be like, oh, I don't have time to draw a face, so let's just jam a face in there, and then you know, like everything sort of evolved from there. So that's all I'd say is I'd say like working on that skill where it's kind of like, and I think Jeff's actually pretty good at really nutting it out. I know he can do that. I think the thing is the middle, right? The middle is where you're kind of, someone's going to say, oh yeah, these look cool, you know, maybe can we do a couple of variations of this or try that? And you kind of need to draw those hands, those little mechanical hands, right? Have you got 4 or maybe more on some of them, right? So you got to draw those real quick, you know, so you kind of got to draw them because you're going to be doing drawings that are just going to get thrown away probably. But you just have to do it quickly. That in itself is a skill. And you just have to practice fudging details and kind of doing a half-assed job. But making it read and
just being like, how do I make it look okay? And it's not this thing where that's obvious. You know, a lot of it is like, well, if I use this brush and I hold it this way and I don't try and make any marks like this and I kind of keep it a little bit loose, or I just forcefully move myself forward, whatever it is, you know what I mean? Often, like, for instance, I really find if I tried to do those characters that I was doing with a brush that was bigger or smaller, it wouldn't work. If it was like one size up, I think that's like a 10. If I tried to do it with like a 7 pixel brush or a 15, it wouldn't work. Because I just know,
you're just comfortable with that.
I'm very comfortable knowing with that pixel size, that character size, how much detail I can put in, because I've done it a lot of times. If you give me a bigger brush, I won't be able to know how to fudge the same detail. I'll figure it out, but it'll take me like 10 characters. You know, it'll take me a couple of days to really be like, this is what I can get away with.
It's really interesting how fine-tuned you know, you can kind of get with technique in your process and things like that. And it's like everyone is different, but all have levels of kind of like nuances of the similar kind of thing.
And if I was to do a more detailed drawing, one of the first things I'd do is I'd take, you know, those are done at about 3,000 pixels high. What I do is I'd say, I'm going to just do a drawing, but I'm going to make it 8,000 pixels high, right? And I'm going to use this size brush. And that means it's kind of like, I've got tons of room to be like, here's every little ratchet button on that mechanical arm. I'm going to draw it all out, you know what I mean? But I can't do that on a small bit of paper. So that sounds like I'm sort of nitpicking stuff, but that's an example of where you really need to try it and explore and experiment. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get there. You should have no reasonable expectation of just being able to say, I'll add more detail and do it loosely. until you practice it
No,
100 times.
That's cool.
Anyway, move on. Time's up.
Awesome.
Next.
No, I think they're cool, Jeff. Just
they're good.
Yep. Let's work on that.
Add more detail.
Yep.
Be great. Can't wait to see them when they're finished.
That's all right. Good luck, Jeff. All right.
Yeah.
So, Courtney.
Cool.
Yeah. So, I know you're in the stream there. So, and been chatting with Courtney a little bit about this image.
Witcher stuff?
Yeah, this is. Yep.
Yep.
So,
cool.
Hero stumbles across an ancient temple where he will train to master some long lost dark arts magic. Located high in the mountains, the temple has long been abandoned and left in ruins. Vultures surround the temple and hunting for rotting corpses. Yeah. So, Courtney, some of the things that I would say that you kind of want to do is one of the biggest things that you want to remedy really quickly is getting out of painting blacks in here,
right?
Because it's just it just is messing things up. Straight away. Yep. So I think what's really good, because we did have a little chat about getting some reference and things like that, is that this reference here is great, and what I do is kind of like look at the things a bit more closely to get your colors kind of working, and some of it's kind of tricky because there is some darks in there and stuff. But what I feel is that there's a lot less than kind of what you have, and you just want to kind of get it out of here, because it's just making the image very it's just messing up the value structure of your painting very quickly.
It's meaning that one of the things, if you do want that giant vista, is that you really need to control the atmospheric perspective, because that's going to be your major tool. Yeah, the major thing that you can use to kind of beat like an image into place, right? Is like, if you want it to be epic and it's kind of vast distances, you kind of need to fade things out as they go into the distance and work with that. And as soon as that basically means there'll be nothing black, do you know what I mean, past the foreground. That's really right. Like nothing at all. Yeah. You may get sort of down lower in the value scale, but not like, you're not going to get to black. Yeah. And typically I'd say, one of the other things is, I think if you do make it black, you sort of engage that graphic thing. So making it black and increasing the contrast kind of gives you the illusion that the image is more finished than it is. Whereas if you were to kind of do what like a lot of people would recommend from a process standpoint, which is to kind of save the final whites and sort of blacks, right? Your last 10% of value scale, you save that for the end, right? For those final little details and highlights. What would happen is a lot of these images, a lot of these things that are black would turn gray. And then I think the image itself would kind of look a bit gray. Yep. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Because just a lot of those things are kind of like, they're all black, they're all the same value. So mostly what you want is like separation between planes in the image. Yes. And you can't, if something in the foreground is black or something's in the middle ground is black, basically your kind of image can't work. Well, they're on the same plane, right? So they're essentially like, if you think about things as like cut out pieces of paper, and as they go off in distance, you want them to be coming lighter. You're basically putting this plane and this part of the painting and this part are essentially on the same plane, which is the foreground. So that's why Courtney is feeling kind of flat, because you're not actually getting the depth in there that you kind of want. So it makes the castle not look as big as it could be. Yeah, because it feels like it's kind of like on the same piece of land as this stuff here. Yep. Yeah. One of the other things I was thinking about, Courtney, while Tim was kind of talking about things, is that, looking at the reference is pretty cool. And maybe what you could do is you could kind of add in some of this kind of like ruined rubble, kind of like almost walls, to maybe try and like push in some areas of that kind of zigzagging shapes, and to help create a bit of overlap, and because that'll help the depth. And depth and things like that. And the other thing that you can kind of do that's happening really cool in here is like you could be adding some like kind of some of these guys around the place, maybe even some stuff over here, right, that are also going to help like sell the sense of depth.
So these could be sort of a little bit darker value, you know, and then you could have some you know, some more pillars and things here. Right?
Yeah. Well, I think she was saying she was kind of like it needed more like sort of recurring shapes.
Yeah.
And it's like it's that thing where it kind of a lot of these things are so simple. You know, it's like that zigzag shape is really good to lead the eye.
Yeah.
Having something in the foreground that you can show in the background is almost, you almost absolutely need to do that, right? Or it's actually going to be a lot more complicated to complete the image. And that's just sort of things that, that's what people do. They just add that stuff in.
Yep. And these, what these kind of things do, right, is they give overlap. Right, they create overlap, which in turn creates depth, and then you just got to control that value as well to get the overlaps to read. But they're the things that you kind of want to add in. Is like they're the details that you want to add in because they're being useful within the image, right? Yeah. So you want to add in things of overlaps. You want to add in things that are going to be leading lines and directional kind of compositional elements. So that's good. Now, the other thing, Courtney, is just always think about this stuff too. So in the background, you've created these kind of like layer cakey lines where they're not inherently layer cakey, like you don't kind of think of that, but a lot of these mountaintops and everything, they kind of finish on the same
there's a lack of variety, which technically you would, because a lot of like the snow cap is related to height. So you wouldn't want to just be like, I'm going to put a giant mountain, one of those giant purple mountains high, because if it was high it would have snow on it. But I think you're talking about variety. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and also what you really want to think about is compositional abstract shapes, right? So you want these, whether it's the clouds or the mountains, you know, you want stuff doing this, right?
Yeah.
Because then it's pointing at the shape that you kind of like. This seems so simple, right, when you do it. Yeah. But like these are actually making your eye move in that direction to the focal point. Yeah. Right. Now the other thing you could do is like you could have, you know, clouds, and we see there's a real trend at the moment for people to kind of make these really voluminous kind of fluffy cloud things, which are awesome, and the guys are using them basically like as a shape to kind of like point you into the composition. And if you flip a really like interesting way to think about this is that if you flipped this image upside down, you could treat the clouds as a river, basically. Like, so you once again, you want them to zigzag, and it goes into the distance, right? You know what I mean? Yeah. And it gives the sense of, and so you want them to be, you know, thicker at the front and like, you know, smaller off into the distance, and that's going to create that sense of perspective. So that gives you that feeling of the clouds, you know, being up and around and all that kind of stuff. Yeah,
that you're sort of you're in a world.
And then that's why guys are starting to paint these things where, you know, it's almost like they're a 3D shape where you can kind of see the underside and the side and things like that, right? Rather than sort of what you're doing here, Courtney, is just like painting like fluffy, wispy clouds that don't like, that probably exist in, you know, photos and things, but in terms of like when you're painting it, they're not being useful for your painting, right? So everything you do, you want to kind of like break it down into graphic abstract shapes, and it needs to have like a purpose of being in the painting. So there's some sort of things that you can kind of
and it's also that like there's like we're talking about things that you can do to solve problems. You know what I mean? Like if you're
these are
like,
all things.
It seems like a giant. If you think about the toolbox, like I feel like Simon has a giant hammer with which you can solve most problems, and that is to create a zigzag shape that leads towards a door somewhere in the environment. Do you know what I mean? And that's like, you know what? This thing's real good. You whack any problem with this, and it probably just goes away. You know, it's sort of like whack-a-mole. You just keep hitting it with that zigzag thing, and it's like, And
it's like my doorway to this is just like up here, right? Like, and basically everything in the image is going to that. Because this is the drone riding with the line tool here, because that's the focal point of the image, right? Like, that's what you want the viewer to feel like they've got to like obtain that goal. They've got to go to that like kind of spot.
And that's like, again, it's like, I think those are like the basic building blocks that you can use to kind of solve problems, and they're everyone's. You know what I mean? That's not your unique thing, you know what I mean? Like lots of people use these sort of tools. It's just that often I think what happens is people get very subtle at using them.
That's all right.
And also people have more tools, right? So it's really a matter of learning to use those so that if you get into trouble,
you can always bring
you can use that, right? Like that it sounds really silly, but that's often how I think about it, you know what I mean? Is like I have these tools that I can use to kind of like say, you know, like just decide, like, you know, another thing I have is like a list is like, do you know where your light source is? Have I got a good foreground, middle ground, background, right? And I know, like, that sounds really simple, but as a tool, if I'm looking at a painting and I'm having that like, something's wrong. This is not looking good, right? Like danger. I sort of say, do I know where my light source is? Do I have a foreground object? And so many times, one of the things, if you don't have a dark foreground object, what would otherwise be very reasonable mid-ground gray tones suddenly look dead, and your whole painting is just mush. If you don't have that, foreground object to be darker than your middle ground, it sounds so silly. But if you don't have that foreground object, you kind of have to make. What happens is your whole image lacks contrast because you don't have any dark values. And so what happens is then you make your middle ground darker to give it contrast, and then you lack the depth. Do you know what I mean? So it's like it's the reason you have that stuff is because if you take out one of those major linchpins of the whole thing, it becomes very tricky. And I think it's sort of good. Artists just become very good at kind of either using those tricks in subtle ways or just kind of being tricky when they've got the chance. When the image is working, that's when you can be like, wispy clouds, I've always wanted to do this.
That's right.
I won't have the really dumb, you know, sort of like easy, you know, like not easy but simple way to do it. That's when you can be like, I'm going to try something different. I've mastered all those things.
That's right.
Yeah,
and I think like Tim's right, like as in these tools are like what I would do to, like, you know, teach someone how to get better at doing this stuff, right? But then when you're trying to paint something yourself, you're like, okay, I've got this. I know that I'm going to have some of these things here, but let's try a bit of this and a bit of that, and you kind of like you start having, you know, the screwdriver and the you know, like all the different tools that you can add that make the painting more interesting and stuff, right? But Courtney's sort of asking, like, you know, should I scrap this and start again? Was I on track with the composition? Like, there's lots of stuff here, Courtney, that's working well, right? Like, there's little individual, you know, like the guy on the horse and that is looking great.
I think the mountains look pretty good.
The mountains look good,
Good color separation. It really feels like they're in the distance. I think there's a really good sense that there is a guy on a horse. He is overlooking this sort of, you know, marshland sort of thing.
I was going to say, like, I think all this stuff's
super clear.
Working well.
You've got some cool mountains. They're like nice colors. I think it's just like sort of foreground elements, and figure out where the light is coming from, right? Figure out, is it coming from the left or the right, and just go through and do a pass where it's like, before you do anything else, just make sure that the light source is relating to everything. Because one of the problems with not having a good light source is that until you go through and fix everything, it won't look right. Like if we just go and say, you know what, I'm just going to apply like a right light source to that castle thing in the background. If I just apply it to the thing in to that castle, then the rest of the image is still going to look weird. But if I then go and apply it to these rocks and the mountains, I make sure the mountains have got the same light source. Do you know what I mean? If you make sure everything is kind of lining up, then it'll sort of start to kind of come together.
So it's more just a case, Courtney, of like the ones you've been doing are like getting better all the time. So just keep going and really, like, you know what, with this type of thing is like, this is one of those things where I'd just be like, you know what, just hand this up as it is and call it done, and just take those things and move on to the next painting. Because I feel like with something like this is that, like, sometimes what you can do is you can just be like fixing it. And you're just like going around and around circles, and you fix this bit, and then this bit's not working, and blah blah blah, and it's just like, don't stress about that stuff. Just like just do another painting, and then next time try and think about those things a little bit more.
Well, I think I mean, if you want to be more organized than that, one thing you can do is say, like, you know, what are like some of the major things, right, that are like here that you know could be going well, could be going better, or going wrong, right? And the one that would be too much black, right? Not not keeping the planes of the image different value-wise, and I think not having a clear indication of where the light source is, right? And so when you create your next painting, just say, you know what? I'm just going to make sure, at least in this one painting, I'm going to think about where my light source is. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
I'm going to make sure...
Or not paint to black so much. Yeah.
Yeah.
So things like that, yeah.
And just say, like, you can try and do two things at once, but at the very least, I just say, what, you know what? Even if I have black everywhere, I'm going to make sure light source, I knew where it was, right? And what that you may lose sight of other issues, but at least you're kind of building that muscle, right? And you can sort of say, well, this next painting, because like the reality is the next painting also will have issues, and the next one, and all of them will have issues. Like all my paintings have issues, right?
Sorry, Courtney.
Sorry, but the thing is, if you kind of focus and say, you know what, I decided that I was going to work on not having too much black in the image, and this image I created didn't have black everywhere in the image, right? You can then say, I achieved something. Do you know what I mean? This is good. It's like, tick. You can feel good about yourself. Yeah, as opposed to kind of like, oh, it's still, I didn't get everything working,
Yeah. And what's really cool, Courtney, is like, I feel that there's, not that I've got a list in my head, but there's kind of like 5 major things that students do wrong, right? Like there's like 5 things, right?
Yep.
And one of them is like, when students get into colors, painting way too much black in colors, right? And what I've seen is that I've seen a number of students when they've come in, like starting out, this is what their problem, like their number one problem. And within like a year or a year and a half or whatever, they're not doing it anymore. So the cool thing is like you can solve it easily, and I guarantee that you'll get better at doing it. So like don't stress out. Like you'll get better at doing it, because I've seen so many students like just this is like a major problem for some people. They just like whatever reason just happens, and they can fix it, right? And so it's really cool. So yeah, like Tim said, just try little like baby steps.
Get an A4 bit of paper, right? And just write like, where is my fucking light source? Right?
That escalated quickly.
And like stick it to your monitor, okay?
Yeah, and just have it there.
And just be like, every time you look up, you're like, okay, where's my light source? Where's my light source? Pardon my French, but where's my light source? Okay, and do the same thing. Do you have too much black? Right, and I think I'm not being facetious. I think phrasing it as a question is good. Yeah, because if you ask yourself a question, your brain immediately comes up with an answer. Right? Do you know what I mean? Like if I say like what color is this? Yep. Your brain, like you can be like, no, don't do it, but your brain just went, it's black. You know what I mean? And it's like if I say like, don't think of like a purple unicorn, and you're just like, god damn it, purple unicorn. If you kind of say, do I know where my light source is, right? Or like, where is my light source coming from? Your brain is immediately like, no, in which case you can be like, okay, you should do that, right? Whereas, if you just sort of say, make sure you know where your light source is, it's different, right? So think about it, and this is sort of being nitpicky, but neurolinguistically, if you write the right thing down, and if it is activating, do you know what I mean? If you use like, where is my fucking light source, it's going to do a different thing in your brain than if you just say like, one should make sure one knows where one's light source is. It's doing different things to your brain.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
And people use that, do you know what I mean, to affect, you know what I mean? I swear way too much. I should work on it. I should be like, have you sweared too much in the stream? And I'll stick that to my if so, stop it.
all right, let's move on.
Anyway,
but it's cool. I digress. All right, yeah. So yeah, okay. All right, Kieran. So looking at Kieran's stuff,
cool.
He just says working on bringing up the house thumbnail from last show, and would like some help with adding atmospheric distortion to help separating the background and foreground elements.
Yep.
And also some general thoughts on the composition would be appreciated. I'm also aware I have to do a lived-in pass, like Pete said last week. I was thinking about putting a farmer out the front in a rocking chair. So yeah, I don't know, do you want to talk about this one a little bit, or
Sure.
Do some
well, again, I think there's lots of different logical things you can do when it comes to like getting the atmosphere, right? And I'd say don't necessarily think like it feels very sort of graphic black and white. I don't know whether it needs to be graphic black and white, but I think maybe that's one of the things that's sort of going wrong with it insofar as it sort of doesn't have depth. So yeah,
well, I think it depends what the kind of purpose
Sure.
of it is,
Well,
right?
that's
Like,
it works well as a black and white image.
yeah, like I actually think it's pretty cool, right? Like just as far as that, but then Kieran, you're talking about like adding atmosphere in there, and like, well, like at the moment it feels like it might be sort of like a bit of a comic, kind of illustration
it's
or whatever,
like black and white.
Yeah, it's not. I don't feel like it's like Courtney's image, which was like a big epic landscape painting. They feel like there's something different, but maybe Kieran's thinking that this is meant to be a big epic landscape. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, one thing you could do is like sort of think about, you don't have to make these things, like 100% white or dark or whatever. We can sort of just play with the tonal range and maybe like save some of those lighter colors for later, right? You could sort of think about, well, I'm just gonna, make things in the foreground a little bit sort of darker, right? And sort of, that'll sort of allow me to sort of push things sort of back a bit. And then you could sort of say, well, I also want to maybe, push that atmosphere back. But you could also use the approach where maybe we sort of said, you know what, maybe the background is a bit sort of darker.
Has some value to it.
Yeah. So it's sort of it's not just sort of white. Because one of the dangers I often feel is that dark foreground, sort of light background is so effective for atmosphere that I think people overuse it. And one of the really interesting things I think you'll find here is that this is going to draw our eye into the image a lot more if we actually keep the foreground bright white, right? And what it also does is it allows us, you've got a lot of these kind of cool noir-esque lights on the image, right?
Well, I think also the kind of dark foreground light background is one of those things where it's kind of like a teaching tool, but then when you start looking at photography and film compositions and things like that, you kind of notice that, well, that's not always happening. Really, a lot of times you have the bright foreground, and then things are getting darker as they go away, but there's some interesting but then there's some more technical stuff that happens that sort of when you're starting out is hard to comprehend, where the contrast is increasing as things come forward. So things feel darker in the background, but they're not, like if you pick them, it's like they're a lighter value than what's in
the simple takeaway is that things move towards the neutral as they recede into the distance, except light colors, which don't, and that's basically just based on physics. So
like snowy mountains and things.
So you see the tips of a snowy mountain, which is bright white, still reflects the light quite well through atmosphere, but the actual mountain itself is the light that bounces off that into your retina is getting affected by the particulate in the air, which we call atmosphere. So it's taking on to a large degree the value of the atmosphere, which is often blue. Because of the sky. Because also the particulate in the sky is reflecting and refracting the sky, which is blue. I don't know why the sky's blue, but anyway. So what this does also, from a physics standpoint, I mean, the sky's blue because it's blue, but or because that's the color that it's reflecting into our retina. But anyway, what my point is that also it will give it a creepier vibe, right? It's sort of saying like as we go towards the distance, right, things are going to get darker. So that's also an option, right? Yeah, because we always sort of talk about like, oh, just again, a real simple hammer to use is that you have a dark foreground, right? Gray tone middle ground, white background, right? It'll separate easily, but that's not often how reality works, and you can sort of do different things. So
what you've done here is how reality works, where you've got more contrast in the foreground. So you've got your brightest brights and your darkest darks, and I think this is always going to be graphic until you kind of like soften some of these darks in the building, because
there's too much contrast there. Because dark things don't have a high contrast, right? So something which is sort of dark in here, right, we can sort of push the contrast of this sort of building back a little bit. Less sort of contrast there. But you can also, once we've done this, right, then go and sort of pick out, if you wanted to have some of that sort of, again, noir lighting on the rim light, You know what I mean? You now got the value range to do that, whereas previously you didn't. So a lot of that, one of the problems is a lot of that light that was coming here was kind of getting lost against the background.
So this is like this is almost like in reverse to Courtney's thing, where basically like she was painting in the darks.
Yeah.
So then you can't really get any more darker in there, and here we're talking about how can we sort of change around so we can get those lights into the scene.
Yeah, I mean, there's many options, right? Because essentially we're starting with a graphic image. Now, one of the reasons it's really good to start with a graphic image is your drawing's done, and you can sort of start to play around with this. And as long as you know, right, that you are going to need to actually start to push and pull the image a little bit, you can do quite a bit of sort of, you know, like sort of drawing and sort of compositional stuff. Like the drawing's there, but what I'm thinking about is like, where's it going to help me to have lit? Sort of, you know, lighter colors, you know, so we could sort of put it on, again, the tree, right? And again, because we know that light is still going to be, like the tree is still going to be affected by the light. The light color is not going to be affected by atmospheric sort of atmosphere and stuff. I'm not sure whether is that tree, I think that tree is it's going past here, like sort of joining the house, and that's a shadow, I think, something like that. I'd probably...
Oh, right. I thought it might have been going over. Yeah. But.
Yeah. So again, like one of the things that you'll find is super useful, like ridiculously useful for solving these problems is using darken and lighten filter, like darken and lighten. So that's what I'm doing.
Yep.
Yeah. So like you'll see like this one is set to darken. And what that means is that I sort of selected this gray, and as I paint over it, you can see it's not actually affecting the darks, right? Because it'll only paint over essentially colors that are lighter than it is.
Yep.
So anything that's darker than it is, right? These darks, it's just kind of like, nope, I'm not going to show up. Yep. So I'm not painting gray mush over my blacks. Being able to control those is super important. And in a similar way, if you use the lighten, this is one of those major tools that people use specifically for separating things out, and that's because it does exactly what you want, right? So I can use this. Is that set to lighten? Yeah. So I can sort of use this, right? This one, and it's going to sort of like blend out the darker colors, but not the lighter colors, right? So I can completely wipe out everything, but because that white is lighter than the color I'm painting on it, it's still going to be there. So it means, right, if I've sort of already put on some highlights, I can do the one thing we want to do, which is to separate, right, like some of these trees off into the distance. And I don't have to worry about like upsetting a lot of the values that I've already got there. And now I can kind of maybe separate the house out a little bit from that branch, which I think may or may not work, because I know that we wanted to kind of have that branch touching the house. But anyway, we can go back and sort of erase that. But often, again, like as a tool, that's one of those major ones where you're like, if you're saying like where Courtney was worrying about, oh no, I've got too much black everywhere, like lighten layer, pick the atmosphere color, wipe just it over your background, and like bang, done. You know what I mean? Like that's you know, just one of those things. So that's sort of something I'd say, and you know, then we can sort of play around with. Again.
And I think like even when I'm like say getting a lot of photo textures in and things like that, the two layers that layer modes I'm using like almost exclusively all the time are lighten and darken, because the way that you can paint something underneath and then either use lighten or darken to basically just pop out the highlights or just bring in the shadows. And basically that helps describe those forms, right? And then you get a more suggestive nature to the image that you're kind of plugging in on top of.
So yeah, I think one of the other things you can think about with fog is that fog doesn't necessarily have to be everywhere. You can have just some here because you want, because that helps. The other thing is typically I think fog will collect near the ground. So that's one of those things they say, like if you have a giant mountain, right, in the distance, often, and you sort of fog it out, often the top of it will be like clearer than the bottom. Right. So if you have a mountain, right, you want it to be sort of realistic, we're much better off sort of fogging out the bottom of stuff, right? Like just physically as if it's sort of lower on the ground than you are the top, because that's how sort of fog or mist sort of tends to work.
Yep.
So you can sort of do that, and most people's brains will be like, oh yeah, that's cool. But you can also just kind of do it as you wish, because you can just imagine that there's some giant bit of fog kind of just rolling over where you want. So that's kind of what I'd sort of do.
No, I think it's looking awesome. Yeah.
Yep. And I think that's there. It's like the drawing was done. It's mostly there. You can add some more stuff. I would say you don't necessarily need to add a character. Things you could sort of try is like, just adding signs, like what if you were living there, what would you do? Do you know what I mean? So it's sort of like, maybe you would tie, like a rope, you know what I mean? Like down there, and, maybe have like a tire swing or something like that, or, I don't know where that's a very high tire swing, but
I know what you mean. Or like wood, piles of wood and the axe hanging out.
Piles of wood, exactly,
like
right? Like sort of some stuff like that. Little bits and pieces.
Deck chair on the porch or something.
Yeah, cool. So anyway, that's sort of what I'd sort of play around with. Yeah.
Yep.
But no, it's looking good. Like it's there, and I can see it, and that's one of those things. I see it, and I'm like, awesome. That's cool. You just needed to do this.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And there's 3 or 4 things you can do.
Yeah. No, it's cool. It's cool. All right, and so last one, or while we're really running out of time, is Kyle. So and doing a just
rapid response reconnaissance vehicle.
Yeah, and just wanted some feedback on how to do vehicles and things.
Yep.
And I mean, I think sort of like the biggest thing that I would say, Kyle, and we've probably had this conversation before many times, is just keep looking at references, right? Just keep looking at the things that you want to draw or paint, design, and just doing studies of that stuff and building that visual library of things is great. Like if you want to get good at like drawing these vehicles, let's try and just
Yep. But while we do that, I mean, I can say a few things. I'd say primarily, I think the idea is actually pretty cool, right? It has like a bit of a G.I. Joe sort of, you got some cool tracks and stuff like that. Like I think the idea is actually very solid. I think one of the main things letting it down, right, like stopping it being sort of, like slick and stuff like that, is just the drawing, which sounds like, just like, the drawing and the rendering of it. But I think that's important, is that the idea is actually pretty cool, and he's gotten most of the way there in terms of the perspective.
Yeah. Like
there's tons of stuff going right. But I think it's just understanding, again, the degree to which you're going to have to do things like figure out where your ellipses are.
Yep.
If you were to render this properly, it would actually be quite involved in terms of, like drawing out all of your perspective grids, finding your ground plane, understanding how to draw an ellipse, understanding how to like, accurately draw an ellipse in Photoshop, you know what I mean? How to, like offset all your wheels and stuff like that. And also like the secondary forms and greeblies and details of a tank, which I think you've got a photo of there, that you're going to need to give it that feeling of polish, right?
Yeah. So it's just like one of the things, Kyle, is if you want to get good at doing this stuff, you should just literally like draw 5 of these tanks.
Yep.
Like just get the photos.
There's nothing easier.
Draw 'em.
Nothing easier. Maybe not as fun if that's not something that appeals to you, but nothing that will, in a sort of a guaranteed, like just do this really dumb thing and it'll get you better at doing that.
Yep.
Because I think the other thing is that if you see that there's maybe your tank is a bit wonky, right? It's not because of the design. It's not because of this. It's because of something you're doing with the drawing. Like you're not figuring out how to draw the ellipses or whatever. So that's why often, and it's not like you have to slavishly make it perfectly like that tank. You know what I mean?
No.
Just have fun. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like draw the tank, but that way it'll be like, wow, my thing doesn't look anything like that tank. What's the difference? And you can ask someone even and say, what's the difference? And they'll say, you don't have any of these cut lines. You haven't drawn all the little rivets. That's what makes a tank look like a tank. And if you don't put them on, he's got some, but again, if you're trying to draw vehicles and you don't know how to draw ellipses, there's nothing on this earth that will save
look
you.
Messed up.
Do you know what I mean? Like nothing at all, right? And they will always look wonky. If you just cleaned up the ellipses on this drawing, it would look twice as good.
Yeah.
Right? Like just, and that sounds really.
And even even as far as, Kyle, like when you're drawing stuff on the side like this, these wheels are circles.
Yeah.
Like they are just like use this tool, right, and hold shift and go right click.
Stroke.
We have to be on a layer here.
Yep. F2. We'll create a new layer.
And then go like
stroke
and whatever it is,
just,
and go okay.
Yep.
And that's it, right? Like that's a perfect circle.
Yeah.
And the wheels are perfect. So just think like all that does is just throws off. It goes like, you know, you just go like something's something's wrong with this. Like what's wrong? And it's just the fact that the wheels aren't circles, right?
Yep.
So you think if they're like rotating around, like every bump, because they're not circular. And then Tim's right. So then coming over here, you just need to like plot these things out. So and the way you do
which hopefully you've been taught by now by someone.
Yep. So
please tell me someone's.
Yes. No, I know. We know that this is happening.
Yeah. But it's hard to remember. Like it's not.
That's right. When you're in the moment.
And I think also the number one thing with this is it's very easy to become overwhelmed with the potential amount of ridiculous technical work that it's going to require to draw all those ellipses.
Yeah.
But once you practice it enough, it just kind of happens. Do you know what I mean? And
then you plot those points in and you get the ellipse, right? Or if get it better,
cheat.
Yeah.
Just draw the whole wheel in 2D.
You grab this. Now we've done it on the same layer, but basically you get this.
Yep.
Oh, wrong buttons. And when you hit transform,
Control T.
Yep. On this circle, basically all you do is hold down, Control or Command or whatever it is on your computer, and you just drag these points of the
where you want them.
Oh,
that's weird. You broke it.
I did. Oops. Probably because I'm just pressing the wrong buttons.
Yeah.
You just drag these points.
Yep.
Into the points of the perspective box that you just drew, right?
Yep.
And that's it. And then you got ellipse in perfect perspective.
And then you can copy it,
right,
and make it smaller.
You can copy it and drag it across.
And that's not super accurate, but it'll get you 95% of the way there.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so that's it. But if Kyle, if you're having trouble with this, if you're like, where did I miss doing this? Just ask someone. We'll show you how to actually do it. Because again, it's a fairly significant demo, how to draw the ellipse. I could do it, but we'd be here for another 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's right.
Or 15 minutes.
But that's it, Kyle. Like, lots of cool stuff going on. I'd say keep doing studies of things. Right, super important. That's how you're going to develop that visual language. That's going out and running, right? That's just your exercises.
And it shows you what's wrong. You can see, all my wheels look wonky on my tank.
Yeah.
Maybe I should figure out how to draw the wheels. And as you get better at drawing wheels, you can see them improve on your studies.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
And some of the bits you see here in the tank is like these coverings that are going over the top is like exactly what you're trying to draw on here.
Yeah.
But if you kind of like flatten these things out a bit and just think about, how those shapes are kind of going, and you do this, you follow those references there, then it's going to, like Tim said, it will start becoming, you'll be like, oh, okay, right. Like that's how I've got to kind of do that shape and stuff. Yeah. And you just develop those tools of that and that visual vocabulary to achieve those things. So,
no, that's the plan. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Anyway, I think we have to run because it is the end of the show.
We're gonna wrap up.
Yeah, cool. So thanks for sending in feedback, stuff for feedback. It's been, it's kind of always cool to see what people are up to, and see people how everyone's sort of progressing.
Hang on.
Oh, did someone do it? Woohoo! Yep.
Yeah, that's gonna go viral.
Yeah. I like the size with which that was kind of done. That's a real texter.
Well, you can't sort of forget that. So don't forget it now, Courtney. Right? Yeah.
I apologize unreservedly for any harm or emotional damage which I've done by making that happen. But hopefully, it's a force for good in the world.
Yeah. All right. So thanks, guys. Please, any feedback, let us know on the Facebook page. We're still working behind the scenes on some other stuff with the stream. Just trying to keep developing it each week, and we hope you're enjoying things, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Okay, bye guys.
See ya.